Hello, today is December 20th, 2006. We're meeting with Mr. Buford Plemmons at his home in Fort Collins, Colorado. My name is Brad Hoops. I'm the interviewer for the Northern Colorado Veterans Oral History Project. Welcome, Mr. Plemmons, or Buford. We'll go with Buford, correct?
Yes, sir, that's fine.
All right. Well, let's start out, if we could. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself, where you were born and your date of birth.
I was born in what was called Stevens County, Oklahoma. We weren't born in hospitals. We lived on a farm. In fact, my folks owned that farm until they passed away, both of them. And Dad was the last one. That was 1982. And he's sitting there ready to roll his last Prince Albert cigarette and apparently his heart quit. Anyway, I was born and raised on that farm, 160-acre farm. Went to a little two-room grade school. Rode horses, or when I got a horse, I had a Jenny. Rode from grade 2 through grade 5. She was a good old gin. That's a female mule, female donkey. And my grandmother bought it for me, but I rode it to school till 5th grade. I graduated to a horse. And so anyway, I was born in 1922, November the 29th, 1922. We lived on the farm, and I went to high school out also in the country. Graduated from there and was president of my class 2 of the 4 years while I was there. And then went on in 1940. I graduated at age 17. I went on in 1940 to East Central State College. At that time, it's now called East Central State University at Ada, Oklahoma. And went into school there and worked my way, did all I first carried newspapers, Daily Oklahoma and Oklahoma Times, paid for my room and board. Then I got on to what was known then as NYA, and that's the National Youth Association. It's federal programs. And what many of us worked our way through school and through that system. We worked on campus, go to school half a day and do dirt work the other half. And then the war broke out in 1941.
Do you remember where you were when you heard Pearl Harbor's been bombed?
Yes. The way I remembered, I was walking from it was a Sunday, walking from getting my breakfast. I guess it was my lunch that day, and they usually gave us a sack lunch for the evening meal, so I was walking along with my sack lunch we ate over in what was called the girls' dormitory. There's only 2 dormitories there at that time, the boys and the girls. And at that time I was living in the basement with about 30 other fellows that was doing the same program as I was. But anyway, I was just walking back to my room. And I don't know, I as a youngster at that time, I'd have been 18 years old, I guess, by then. Yeah. And I took a funny attitude. Well, we got to kill so many people so we can get back to peace, was my attitude, which is a sad attitude, but that's the way I saw it as a youngster. That's about true if you really got down to business. You wipe out your enemy to where they were not strong and move on with what you've got to do. And that technically is really what we did. So that's the way I came through up into the college. And then at age 19, I joined the Navy. I had to register, of course, for the draft. And it wasn't really breathing down. They weren't really breathing down my neck at that time. I was registered and would have to go in sometime within a year or so. Well, what they were doing was giving fellows that were in school deferred time. So I joined in August 1942 in Oklahoma City, and I joined what was called a V12 program, and with the idea that I'd get to finish school. Well, I got into 1942, summer 42. I was in school that summer, but I was going into my senior year, and so I thought I was going to be able to finish, but I lacked one semester before I could. So at the end of this whole thing, that's where I went back and finished my first degree, but I just lacked one semester. So anyway.
Can I interrupt you a second
Yes.
and just ask the question? Being a farm boy from a landlocked state, how did you choose to join the Navy?
That's interesting. I'll be glad to talk about that. Where I was born and raised on that farm was in the southwestern Oklahoma. And Fort Sill, I was born in between, on a farm, my grandparents' house, between Duncan, Oklahoma and Lawton, Oklahoma. Lawton, Oklahoma, there's 13 miles either way to go to those two cities. Lawton, Oklahoma is the home of Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And of course, if you will, I grew up with soldiers. We had them around all the time. And I decided that's not what I wanted to do. I didn't want to walk through the war. And so as I took an attitude that I'm going to join the Navy. And the Navy at that time was offering some very good opportunities for us. And what I was after, because I'd had some friends that went through that same program, a little older than I was, I could go ahead and go into Naval Officers Training, which I did. So that's what the V12,
Okay.
it was sorry, I should have said V7 was the first one, V7. V6 was Navy Air Corps. V7 was just regular Navy. And then they changed it to V12 after I was called in. But I went in and joined in August 1942, went back to school and finished into summer, about midterm of 43. And at which time they called me in and then sent me to what was called Johnson City, Tennessee. Johnson City had a little small cottage there at that time, and they put several of us in school there. We were there, I was there about 2 weeks, and they decided there were too many of us at that little cottage, so they shipped about 24 of us with one pair of whites. The only thing we had to wear till we got something else. It was a few days before we got something else, so we had to wash them every night. Anyway, they shipped us to Carson Newman College. You hear something about them every once in a while after. It's a nice little college, and I finished a semester there. I took, there was a lot of physical training, of course, we had to go through, and marching, things like that. We didn't do any KP there, however, but that's the only thing we didn't do. I took naval history, meteorology, astronomy, physics, and a lot of physical therapy, a lot of physical activity, push-ups and all that stuff that you'd have to go through. Well, anyway, I finished that term, and I was in the first graduating class there as it was. And so they shipped us, they gave us 9 days leave, delayed orders. And I caught a train and went back to home and scouted my sweetheart, who had been in Richmond, California, in Kaiser Fraser shipyard working. She graduated a year after I did, but we grew up as neighbors in simple terms, joining farms. She became my wife. Anyway, we became engaged at that on that 9-day leave. And I went on back then. From there, they shipped me back to Norfolk, Virginia. And we were there in what could be called a boot camp. As many of the enlisted men, I wouldn't want to say it was tough as theirs were, in all fairness, because I know what they had to go through. But we had KP and guard duty and marching and rifle training. Some of the stories from my viewpoint on that, if we were on KP duty, we supposedly had liberty. Liberty wasn't anything at all in Norfolk, Virginia, but it was okay. There's a sign on the courthouse lawn said, "Sailors and dogs, stay off the grass." Interestingly, and not so interestingly, really, but I saw a great bit of racial fights, if you will. See, the blacks at that time still had to sit down there, had to sit in the back of the bus. And those who came from the north obviously resented that. The South boys didn't know any better. But we saw a lot of wrestling and fighting and that kind of thing going on, including one riot, so to speak, at the PX one night. They normally, the poor blacks did not get to go to the PX over there. So they let them have one night over there when we were there, one Saturday night. And a big fight broke out. Chairs was flying, beer bottles flying, pool table, pool cues, because the pool cues were down where they were. And anyway, the chief waded in and finally got it settled down. But there's that kind of thing was going on in that part of the world at that time. And it was very sad, much more sad to me today than it even was then, because I didn't know a lot of the difference. Growing up, I didn't happen to grow up with the blacks, but you know, that I grew up with the Indians, in all fairness, and they were right into classes with me, and we were good friends. So I knew a little bit about race, but I didn't know anything like that. Anyway, then and when we were working KP, we'd get up about, I don't know, 4 o'clock in the morning, somewhere along in there, go over to get the food ready to serve that day. And normally, those of us that had the groups divided in different companies, I guess they'd be. And one company would be on KP duty, one would be on watch, and so forth. Well, we were on KP duty during part of this. We got off, cleaned up everything, and got off about 2 o'clock, usually in the afternoon, and we'd go back about 4 to get ready for evening. Well, we, old lazy ex-civilians, hit the sack. We decided we would rest a little bit. The chief came in. I'll never forget this. He got up on a big table that was there, with a table with benches on the side of it. Got up on top of us, called us all around. He said, I don't know how he said it, but he was very brash about it. Chief Gallagher. He cut our liberty because he caught us in the sack. Well, even though the liberty wasn't anything at all, as far as we were concerned, some of the guys went to the chaplain. The chaplain got on the chief, and so the next day he probably came in, called us up on, got up on the table, and called us around again. He said, "If I'm going to be a to one, I'm going to be a to all." And so he cut our liberty again. So well, anyway, that's just one of the things that was going along with what we were doing at that time. He also, went out to the range to fire, and he got to where if a rifle would jam with the 4 seamen, we were just apprentice seamen at that point, the lowest seaman you can get. And drawing, I think we drew $50 a month. We didn't draw 21. I think we got 50 at that time. And so anyway, he took us out on the range to fire and learn about the M3 rifle. Well, if your gun jammed, he'd kick you in the rear. So I just a young kid off a farm. I didn't know I was going to be kicked in the rear, so I decided all I was going to do is discharge my bullets. I wasn't worried about whether I hit the target or not. Of course, some of them was ready to be a marksman, you know, but not me. I grew up with guns and had guns in the farm, so all I want to do is get rid of those suckers and keep them from jamming. Well, I got by. That's just a couple of little incidents that happened during that time. We stayed from November until February. And then in February, they began to ship us out in different groups. Some went to Indiana to officers training. I happened to go to Northwestern at Chicago. Yale, some of them went to Yale, some went to Harvard. But mine was in Northwestern at Chicago. I was there 4 months back in school, learning seamanship and navigation and a lot of math and ship handling and things like that. We was there a month as seamen, and then after that month they moved us into what was called a midshipman. I have a picture of my first 10 months, I guess it was, as an enlisted man, and then the next 4 months as a midshipman, Northwestern. And interestingly, we had to do a lot of drills and so forth there, plus the seamanship. The attitude around there was if you dropped your pencil, you were a week behind before you could pick it up, because they pushed us fast to get us through that. But anyway, 3 weeks into that program, I took German measles. And they shipped me out to Great Lakes Naval Hospital, which is not too far from Chicago. I spent a week out there, and then they brought me back. And I got back in training. Well, it came time of a break in the 4th week. Either you moved on into the midshipman school, or you went to somewhere else. Flunked out, in other words. Well, they called me in as a captain and an exec. The exec was a commander, and the captain was the captain of the naval base there. They called me in and interviewed me, and they had one of these pencils that has one end was red and the other end was blue. If you got 2 reds, you went to sea. If you got 2 blues, fine. And see, there's several of us having to go through this kind of a situation. Mine, the only reason I was there because I had 1 week. I was just lost. And so what happened with me, and I'll never forget this, the old captain gave me a red. The exec gave me a blue. So they gave me 3 weeks. I had 3 weeks to see how I was doing. They was going to look at me. I never heard another word from anybody. In fact, I wonder if I was going to really graduate when we got down to it. Well, I did. I never heard of a thing. They didn't call me in for nothing. So anyway, that's another little sea story, I call it. So I finished midshipman school and graduated as an ensign in May 1944. And I had corresponded with my wife, of course, considerably, or my fiance at that time, and told her that if I graduated, I'd like to for us to get married. And she was very willing. Her parents were very nice about it. And so I had 9 days delayed orders again. Went back to my hometown in Oklahoma, and after the day after Mother's Day, it so happened that time we were very active in the little country church as youngsters there at that time. But I didn't have a lot of time to plan and do things that you normally would do for a wedding. So we went out to what's called Wichita Mountains. And the Wichita Mountains was just out by Fort Sill and Lawton there. And a nice little chapel. And she had a cousin who was in training, was a minister but in training in SMU down in Dallas. I don't know how we got it because tires were rationed, gasoline was rationed, but we got him some way or another to get on a train and come up that way.
Did your wife have to come back from California, or was she back?
She was back.
Okay.
Sorry, she had, in the meantime, she had gone down to Dallas and worked in a bank down there while I was at midshipman school. So she resigned there and came back and met me in Lawton. And we got married the 15th of May. The next day we caught the train to Portsmouth, Virginia, which is right by Norfolk. Portsmouth was the training for LSTs. I had already received my orders to be aboard the LST 1032. The LST 1032 was being finished in Cambridge shipyards in Boston. And so anyway, we spent rest of May, June, July, and August in training, being able to land a ship, man a ship. We had LSTs down there that they let us, assigned us to make landings and discharge whatever we might have on board just for experience. And so we did have fire training, all that kind of thing.
Is this where you first met your crew, where you guys all first came together for the first time? Okay.
Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. That's right. They were, all of them being brought in from various places to become we had about 120 enlisted men and 12 officers on this LST that I was on. So anyway, we finished our training in August, first part of August. My wife was there with me. I would get to see her on the weekends. And she stayed at Virginia Beach and in fact, she got a cashier's job at one of the restaurants for a while she was there. Well, anyway, they shipped us by train to Boston. And again, my wife, we had arranged for her to meet me up there, and we stayed at the Astoria Hotel in Boston during this time, at which time my ship was being commissioned. And I have a picture of all the officers and men that were at the commissioning. She was there, of course, not just in the audience, but she got to see all that stuff for me. And so anyway, they launched it, which is how they commissioned it, and then began to outfit it so we could take it. So we took it out Chesapeake Bay and with a crew that could train us for our positions. I was what was called a deck officer, and that was being responsible for all the entire deck crew, gunneries, some gunnery, what was called ship fitters, seamen. I had a chief, chief boatswain's mate directly under me. I had an ensign also directly under me. Then I had a gunner's gunnery officer under me, assistant gunnery officer under me at that time. And anyway, I was technically third in command on that ship. If anything had happened to the other two fellows, I was it. And remember, this is just civilians being trained. Never been on a ship. Never hadn't been anywhere near an ocean. But anyway, that's the way they train civilians, of course. Well, we launched our ship, went on a shakedown cruise, which meant we learned how to handle the ship, supposedly. And then we came back into Hudson Bay and loaded up, and that's in New Jersey is where we were. And by the way, I saw my Chief Gallagher. He is over there. He is responsible for loading out some ships. I didn't recognize him, and he didn't recognize me either, so we went along just fine. But I'll never forget, I saw my Chief Gallagher, who had taken care of some in Norfolk. Well, anyway, we loaded up, and we loaded up, interestingly, at that time, an LST has a top deck, and it has a ramp that goes down into what's called a tank deck. The tank deck is all open back to the engine room, back all the way, which means that whole ship was hollow, if you will. It had a place for anchors. We had to anchor things down when it was going out to sea. But we even put a basketball court out there a little later over the way, so we could play basketball. So it was that size. Anyway, and we played another ship. We had another ship come over, and we played them. Something to do. Anyway, and I was out way out in the Pacific. Well, an LST had a ramp that would drop down, so you could, say, run a Jeep or whatever you wanted to, whatever needed to be up and up on the top deck and be anchored up there. And then it had then a ramp, had bow doors. You'd open up the doors, and the doors weren't seaworthy, meaning that they weren't sealed. The doors didn't seal, they just broke the ocean as you're going through it. But you would open the doors and then drop a ramp. And that ramp is what you would drop as close into the beach, or maybe on the beach, to disembark your whatever you had. See, for example, when I'm kind of getting ahead of myself when I explain this, but when we had 27 ducks, D-U-W-K, duck. A duck was a vehicle that could go in the ocean with a screw motor, and or throw it in. It's kind of like we think of going four-wheel drive. It went in. So when they'd get on land, they could disengage the motor, the propeller, and go into four wheels. And that's what we had. We had 27 of them. I'll get back to that toward the end of Iwo Jima. That was when we went to Iwo Jima. Anyway, we loaded up over in the Hudson Bay. I'll never forget this, a Buick, a civilian Buick, and some others. I don't remember them, but the Buick struck my fancy. These were for some officers over in Hawaii. And we had what we call small stores. Small stores are, that's my clock in there, by the way, bird clock. The small stores were mostly shoes, but seamen's gear that should have suits, shoes, things like that. We had that, the very far back of the tank deck was loaded with that kind of thing. And we had an extra load of diesel fuel that was also going to take over there. And then, this where my memory is not real good on, we loaded on what was called an LCT, landing craft tanks. It was, we loaded 1 2/3 of one of those up on our top deck. We had long beams, real heavy beams, and they took a crane and set it up on there. And we discharged that, by the way, at Iwo Jima. One officer, I don't know, about 16 crew, and they could take stuff off of, say, APA personnel ship. And I think of what I want to say about other ships that couldn't go in like we could into the beach. They would, these smaller crafts would load that up and take it on in. They had a ramp also that would drop down.
Is it a larger craft than like a Higgins boat?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we had 2 what you call Higgins boats. That was normal. In fact, I was reading in one of my letters last night here. My wife and I wrote letters to each other every day we could, even though I couldn't write anything about at sea. A lot of it was waiting for mail. That's all we could do, you know. Well, Anyway, one of my letters I happened to look at last night, some LST came along the side of us. I don't know exactly where this was, but it came, I think it was in maybe Saipan, Okinawa later, and ripped off what we call our boat divot. That's not right. The davit. It held that we could raise them up out of the water. They stayed in that. We had one on each side of the ship. Well, one of those plastics ripped off this boat davit that we had to store kept one of our LCVPs is what those were called. They had a ramp also. In fact, I'll talk about that later if we got time. On Okinawa, how we used those things. Well, anyway, back to getting around to where I had to go. We loaded up these cars and small stores and some diesel, headed out of Chesapeake Bay, and was going down the east coast. And I got a warning that there's a hurricane on the way. See, hurricanes are on the Atlantic side, typhoons the Pacific side. And so anyway, all we do was in a convoy, and we had a ship from Netherlands. And by the way, we had the destroyer that had just come around the Pacific to get some repairs, the USS Warrington. See, a destroyer served as your escort, try to keep your submarines torpedoing you. They were that kind of a... So they said to this Warrington, USS Warrington, that they thought they was in good enough shape that they could escort us down to the Panama Canal. Well, they were there along with, I think, about 26 ships we had in that convoy. Mostly LSTs, LCIs, landing craft infantry, LSMs, landing craft mechanism. They were the smaller ships with us. One of Kennedy's boats, I'll think of it later. Can't think what it's called. They were small.
PT?
Yeah, PT boats. Yeah, I can't think of it. Well, anyway, right off of what's called Cape Hatteras off of Florida, we hit this typhoon. Went right through the flat middle of it, just like the ones you heard, like Katrina and so forth like that. And I'll never forget logging, and I was keeping a diary for a while until I got down to the real serious business, and that's when I should have really kept one, but I didn't. Anyway, I kept a little diary in it. I'll never forget recording that the old skipper who was seasoned. He owned 2 fishing boats out of California. In fact, the Navy took them over. He was very mad about that. Huh? Could tell a funny sea story about that one too. Anyway, he said that we watched the barometer. We could tell about where we were in that hurricane. This is our first trip. Everybody got sick. Everybody on the ship got sick. They was sitting around with their life jackets and throwing up. Sad time. I got mine, and that, by the way, I got over it. From then on, I had no trouble at all.
Is that right? Huh.
Yeah, our stores officer, for example, ever down Blaine, we went through 5 typhoons over the other side. One of which was we drug out and had to start the engines in Tokyo Bay after the war. We came right across there and we drug anchor before we had to crank up the engines and move back into position. But we were about to go to the beach, about to be beached, which we didn't want, of course. Well, anyway, the stores officer, for one, never did get over that. Ever John Brown, one of those we'd go through, he was worthless. He'd sit around and sicker than heck. But I, for one, and most, I don't know of anybody else that had that kind of trouble, but he did. Well, anyway, he was a Kansas fella, like me. He wasn't used to the sea either.
Sure.
Well, we went on down, got through it, but the Warrington sank. You know, history shows that USS Warrington sank in that. And we got on into Cuba. That was our first stop. Guatemala, I guess it was. And anyway, some seamen, I'll never forget this, we was down in our lounging room. We had a store, I can't think what it was called. Anyway, a lounging room, having coffee, and these couple of seamen came aboard, madder than hell. They were mad. And they thought that we had passed up some of the seamen that was out at sea, but we never saw anybody. It wasn't us, it was another LST apparently. One LST, and I don't remember which one it was, lost its bow doors, which means it just had the ramp to keep sealed, just a blood-ended ship. They went on into Florida and for repairs. And I don't know what happened to them from there on, but they lost the bow doors in this hurricane. It was really an experience. Well, anyway, we went on through the Panama Canal, came back up to San Diego. I'd been able to communicate with my wife. And we didn't have telephones. No, our farms didn't even have electricity those days. So she was, I think she was with her folks down in Oklahoma. But anyway, she knew I was coming back into San Diego. I don't remember how I got the communication to her. We borrowed enough money from the bank in Oklahoma to get her out there.
Wow.
She joined me in San Diego, and we were there about 2 weeks, 10 days, and then headed on west, of course, to Hawaii. Spent the Christmas in Hawaii, and we did a lot of training over there. You know, those Lanai Island and Maui Islands, we did a lot of training, aircraft training and things like that. And so New Year's Day, they began to, while we were off Maui, and they began to load us up with the 4th Marines. And the 4th Marines, this was an artillery, 105 howitzer artillery division. And so we loaded them up with all their personnel, 27 ducks that carried their 105 howitzers. Each of the duck had a 105 howitzer on it. And set sail and went by the Marshall Islands. I told my wife, so she'd know, she had numbered the islands all in that area, knowing that's where I was going. And so most times I could just sign a number and she'd know where it was. Well, this one time, I said, you remember Uncle Marshall? I had an uncle, my mother's brother. I said, well, he sure is a nice guy, and he described, well, that's the Marshall Islands.
So this was your way of getting past the censorship, really?
Correct.
So yeah, okay. Yeah.
That's right.
Because everything was censored.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They were censored right here, censored by David Daggett. He was my assistant. This little one here says, I talk about breaking the raft cables at the Iwo Jima. I'll talk about that after we get to Iwo Jima. But anyway, we spent Christmas in Hawaii and loaded up began the 1st January and set sail about somewhere around the 17th of January we didn't know where till we got out underway. And at that time then they told us that we were headed to Iwo Jima. Well, that little old Iwo Jima is 5.5 miles long and 1.5 miles wide. Nothing to that. That'd be easy. And the Marines thought so too. Well, we went on through. Didn't have a lot of trouble. Didn't have any hurricanes during that time, or typhoons. But we went on that way and stopped at Saipan. And we had, interestingly, some prisoners of war from Japan that had to help us load up some of our small stores, our food. And they had to wade out in the ocean a little ways. Of course, you could see them very resentful, but they did it for us. But as the Japanese, as we knew them then, they didn't surrender. We didn't catch very many prisoners of war like we did Americans. And so, there's very few that they apparently captured on Saipan. we were on the invasion of Saipan. But we went by Guam. I don't know what I can name all those. We didn't stop at Guam. I told my wife, I had a friend that was at Guam when the war broke out. In fact, he was killed there.
Mm.
And I told her something about him, and she knew where it was because she knew him. Well, anyway, that was the way we kind of communicated on what was taking place.
Now, how often were you able to get mail back and forth? I mean, being at sea, how did mail
That's a good
link
question.
up with you?
Interesting question. If you read these letters, you could get the full picture, because that's about all I talked about. I was looking for letters from her. Thank goodness I got lots of good letters from her. What would happen is, at sea, rarely did we get any kind of mail, of course, but they would have them come over and fly the letters, mail, to a certain point. Of course, Hawaii, there's no problem. They'd fly to Hawaii and bring them out with us. Or we'd go in with one of our LCVPs and pick it up. I talk about that in one of the letters. I thought that was a real privilege. In one case, I got to go with an LCVP and pick up her mail. Well, anyway, the way we would get our mail, and again, if you read the letters, sometimes it'd be 30 days before we'd get any mail, because we weren't anywhere near land, you see. But generally speaking, they'd fly it into, say, Saipan, and bring it by a small boat, or we'd go into a certain place and pick it up. We had a person aboard our ship that was our mail officer. It wasn't an officer mail. He was ranked a mailman. He did everything else that everybody else did, except when the mail was in, he'd go get the mail. And we'd have a mail call, of course. I'd get 30 letters at a time, and that's the way she also would get that many. She said, one of her letters I was reading last night, she had been out to her folks' place, which is east of Lawton, and came in one Sunday evening, and somebody that she was working at that time for soil conservation, when I went out overseas. She went as a secretary of soil conservation, had a good boss, and all the people around her apparently in the post office knew where I was. So they were apparently very good to her to bring her the letters. Whenever they'd come, she'd get them. But, I'm sorry.
That's fine.
One of them I was reading last night is some person that worked at the post office saw 5 letters come to her. So they came to her house and brought it to her. She had a lot of that kind of thing going on. I'm real sorry. Gets me.
Yeah.
So now we wound up finally getting into Iwo Jima with the 4th Marines. But one of the little stories that I've written, the release about Tokyo Rose. We'd hear Tokyo Rose about 5 o'clock in the evening. They'd put her on the ship's PA system so we could hear her. And she'd always come on with great American music. Where she got all those, I don't know. By the way, she was an American citizen and got caught, the way the story goes, in Japan when the war broke out. Then apparently she needed work, so she volunteered with the propaganda group. And she always came in with propaganda. She'd come in with those nice music, songs, play them, which we all enjoyed. And then she'd come in with what had taken place in one of the islands, or an invasion or whatever, where just all kind of American ships were sank, and things that were real bad just made us feel like, oh, the war's going down. It wasn't true. It just wasn't true. She talked about our invasion of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. In neither case, she cited, in fact, some of the ships that was unknown. She didn't know what it was. Well, those were usually an LST or an LCI, a landing craft infantry, or a LSM, one of those old landing crafts, and she didn't know what it was. But she knew what a cruiser looked like and a battleship and things like that, and they did catch some hell in a lot of those places.
So you were able to see through her propaganda? Were you able to,
yeah.
Nobody bought into it? Or,
No,
yeah.
no, we'd ha. Well, one of the ha-ha's is that one evening they put her on, and she said during her report of all this stuff, if you 4th Marines think you had it bad on your last invasion, there won't be enough of you left of what you can all get in a telephone booth. We thought, a little bitty island. They were on reserve, the 3rd and the 5th
Right.
to go first.
Right.
The 4th was to come in and help clean up.
Now, can I just interrupt? Sorry to interrupt here, but as you were transporting the 4th from Hawaii to Iwo, did you have a chance to interact with them? And did they talk about their previous invasions and what that was? Did they prepare you for what you were looking?
A little bit, yeah. Some we would visit with them. Well, see, now a lot of those that were on board our ship were replacements.
Oh, okay.
And they had actually, some were the real old veterans, and some had been replacements because of they were at Guadalcanal. I don't know whether I said that or not.
Right.
They were at the Guadalcanal, and it was a real tough one too, of course. But one story, sideline story. There was an officer, first lieutenant, I believe he was, first or second, I think he's first. He and I would sit out on the deck in the evenings a lot of times and visit about some things. He was from Chicago. His name was Elrod. I don't remember the first name. But here's where he and I got real well acquainted. He had been issued, he had his own watch, and then he'd been issued a military watch for what's called forward observe. So when he's out there calling for fire ahead of him, he had to use that watch for various occasions, and so they issued him to him. Well, at one occasion through this time, we were passing some fuel over to, I think it was a destroyer, if I'm recalling right. That the destroyers couldn't carry a lot of excess baggage. They were fast and had a lot of the firing equipment on their ship, but for example, they couldn't carry a lot of reserve fuel. We could. We had big ballast tanks we could carry that. So we were fueling this ship, and my chief boatswain's mate and I, we'd run a line, what's called a line, a rope, if you will, what's called 3-inch circles.
Diameter.
Yeah. We'd manage with smaller lines to get that over to the ship, and then we attached a line to hold this fuel line to the ship over there. And so it was like this, if you will. And if you wasn't careful, it would catch, with the ships, 2 ships going along, it would catch a wave. And well, anyway, we had rigged this up, and we had what was called a shackle. And the pin of the shackle was coming loose alongside the ship, so this chief boatswain's mate and I were trying to tighten that bolt, if you will, in that, leaning over the ship a little bit, and he happened to hit my watch, and I had an old leather band that I'd perspired a lot because it was hot over there. Well, he hit this, down she went. We were talking about this officer and I, by the name of Elrod. He had 2 watches, and I'd lost mine. And you couldn't, we never saw land. We couldn't buy anything like that at all. And you kind of like a watch, even though you had clocks all around. So anyway, I kept trying to convince him to sell me his watch. he is afraid to, because he's afraid they'd recall the military watch and he'd be without a watch. Finally, I don't know, a day or two before we finally got to Iwo Jima, he sold it to me for $19. Cameron.
That's okay.
And bless his heart, now his story was this. We were at Iwo Jima and unloading a little ways off the beach, letting the ducks go and the sea. That's where that was a catastrophe for a lot of them. They didn't make it in. The motors were drowned out. Well, anyway, this lieutenant with his 105 howitzer aboard his duck had drowned it out, and so we was trying to get them back aboard. And so we had our cable came all the way through the tank deck down by that ramp, and a winch in the back. We thought we could pull him aboard. We had him on the ramp, teeter-tottering, honestly, just teeter-tottering. We thought we could pull him and get him over. Well, the cable broke. Down he went. We threw over we called it above the top deck and asked him to throw a ring, life ring to him, but he had his driver, and his driver, it landed right by the driver, and he took it. Each of them was supposed to have had what you might think of as a inner tube around a belt, and they had little CO2 tubes that they mashed the thing, and it would inflate, and that would keep them afloat. Why, we don't know today, but Elrod didn't have his. The driver did have his, and he was afloat. Well, unfortunately, again, when the boys threw over the life ring, it landed right near the driver, and the driver had two, and Elrod had none. The last we saw him, he was trying to swim toward the ship, and we called up above to the skipper, and he reversed the screws, thinking he'd throw him back out from under the ship. He went under the ship. Oh. Yeah, this is hard for me to tell, quite frankly. Anyway, he went under the ship. That's the last we saw of the skipper. Try to reverse the screws and throw it back out so we could help him out. See if it won't.
I'll be done.
Yeah. That accident, by the way, and one other accident was the only one that we had aboard ship all the time we were there, even though we had kamikaze planes around us. We never had to take one. We took some parts of one that exploded. They landed aboard ship. And anyway, one other little story. D+2, I believe it was. We were there D+3, 3 days after D-Day. Finally unloaded everything. But D+2, we at night, we'd have to go back out away from the island. The idea was to keep kamikaze small boats from coming into our ship, which they did. So, and they'd just drive right in the ship and explode, of course. Well, so they'd ship us back out at sea, a couple of miles maybe away from the island, something like that. And so we were cruising to come back in on D+2 to get ready to unload some of our troops. And my responsibility at what was called General Quarters, when we was all at battle stations, was up by the port side forward hatch. I had a ship fitter, a pharmacist mate. A ship fitter is like you think of as a plumber.
Okay.
And a pharmacist mate, a seaman, I believe a radio man. And I had one more, 5 of us. Our job was, if there was a accident anywhere, was to go to that place and do what we could to secure it. And so I was, we were in the general quarters coming back in, and this is a sad story to tell from my viewpoint, but anyway, I didn't hear that. I had stood watch from watch out at sea, and you were taking a zigzag course. You didn't take just a straight course. You took it this way and this way.
Because of submarines?
Because yeah.
Okay.
Or small boats that they didn't come out with. Yeah. And so anyway, I stood to 4 to 8, 12 to 4, I guess it was, watch. And remember, we'd had a tough day the first day, you know, of all of everything going on. Shells of all kinds and everything you can think of. So it was a trying time. Well, anyway, when I finally hit the sack, I didn't hear the general quarters, which technically I should have been court-martialed, even though I was an officer. But anyway, that's the truth. When my chief came in sometime that morning and said, "Lieutenant, we've had an accident aboard a ship, and we need to get some weights to weight a Marine. We had to bury him at sea." And so I got up at that time, of course, but I should have been right where that poor fellow was. That's the truth. He was up there. He shouldn't have been there. But he was up there by our repair party and took what we call a stray mortar. We don't know where it came from. It could have come from another ship, you know. Hit him right in the stomach and killed him immediately. And so in that story, I lost just temporary, wasn't killed. One of my ship fitter took some shrapnel right around his shins. We had to send him off. I never did see him anymore. I was noticing one of my letters, we later received a Purple Heart for him. And we didn't know what we was going to do to catch him because we didn't know where he was. But anyway, I don't know what we did with it. We shipped it back. But his Purple Heart came aboard our ship some long time, probably even after the war, if I'm recalling right. Well, the story of the poor boy that was killed, we had to rig up a couple planks to lay him on, and then after the service, slide him off into the ocean, and we had to weight him down, and that's what the ship was. My chief boatswain came in to talk to me about what we need to do to get that kind of thing. So that's the story. What we did is to bring over a chaplain. We didn't have a chaplain aboard ship. So one of the other ships did have, and we brought that chaplain aboard with what's called a boatswain's chair from one ship to the other. I don't remember his name, but he performed the ceremony for the poor fellow. We dropped him into sea.
Wow.
That's the only real serious accident that we had. The ship fitter, and I think there was either the radioman or the seaman took some shrapnel also from that. But they were overly serious, but they were enough that we had to ship them back to a hospital somewhere. Never did hear any more from Allred. Don't know what happened to it. Well, anyway, that's the story of Iwo Jima. We beached D+3, was on the beach and was unloading. We'd already unloaded the 27 ducks. By the way, when we left our D+3 in the evening, of the 27, 5 were still operating.
Wow.
5.
Out of the 20? Or 26?
27. That's right, D+3. And here this bunch was supposed to be in reserve, you see. We had no idea they were going to get to what they did. But that's the way the situation was right there at that time. And we had beached then to put off the rest of the gear. Those poor Marines, I forgot how many carbines. They were smaller than an M3 rifle. That's what each one were given, a carbine. It's bigger than a 22, but not as big as a M3. So anyway, when we began to clean up their gear and disembark it on shore, I think it's somewhere around 19 large number of carbines those poor devils didn't take with them. Probably just as well in many cases, because I don't think they got to use them with any significance anyway if they got it in the shore. Many of those poor old ducks sank right out before they ever got into the beach. I don't know why, but the motors were drowned out pretty easy. The sea was pretty rough that particular time. It wasn't just a nice smooth sea. And so we went through all of that. But we went in and beached and was there late that afternoon. You know, that must have been D+2 now to think about it, because we finally unloaded the rest of it D+3. Well, anyway, we were beached and there came a plane, a Japanese plane, right down the beach. He'd come over the island off by Surbachi and right down that beach with ack-ack fire. Right down it. So our skipper, there were several LSTs. In fact, there's a picture. I have a picture of all those beached that time there. Our skipper pulled us off the beach, and thank goodness he did. We didn't take any ack-ack fire. We were just, say, 100, 200 yards off that beach at that point in time. But what happened is, when the sea was so rough, when he's backing off, our bow ramp cables broke. It was flopping this way, and it broke the cable. So we had, all he could do was back up. He couldn't come forward because we'd be filled full of water.
Yeah.
So we, in a way, we managed, and I talk about it in one of my letters to my wife later here, that we finally was able to, we rigged up one more cable, broke it, and we got two more cables. They'd go around a wheel, you know, to raise it up and lower it from the rear end, sort of easy. Well, anyway, we finally that evening got that secured, and that was quite one of my responsibilities. All that stuff was under me. And unloading, I was down right at the bow door, bow ramp. That was my responsibility down there at that time. Well, anyway, those are the two really only on serious things that we had happen. We made three trips after the war. Oh, I skipped Okinawa. We went back to Saipan and the Philippines. We went down, we could fill up with food supplies and water supplies. We had what was called condensers that could make some fresh water while they'd accumulate salt, and it would supply us for a few days. But what had happened with all the time we'd been out there, all that salt had filled in. You have to take it out and go some kind of a drill, I don't remember, drill all that salt out so it could work again. Well, anyway, we'd have to go where we could to get, and mostly around Leyte, to get water. So we went back down to the Philippines several times and to Saipan. Came off of Saipan, going to Okinawa. We loaded up the 2nd Marines on that one, which was a construction. We had big tanks, cranes, things like that on our ship. And we took that, and of course they didn't go in until things was rather secure, because we had to take them all the way into the beach to just, we couldn't do them like we did the ducks on Iwo Jima. Let me go back to Iwo Jima and tell you a little interesting little story, a little sea story. A gentleman here who, I think he lives mostly in Mexico right now, Dr. Henson, one of our fine great surgeons right here in Fort Collins. He and I were visiting about Iwo Jima one time. He was on the, I believe it was the Missouri, and they'd pull right up by the side of old Mount Surbachi and fire away at everything they could to try to protect our soldiers as they were coming aboard. They're going ashore, see. Well, anyway, at night, they had fire to see that the Japanese were so dug in that they had to do their movements at night. Well, what we were doing then is some of those larger ships would fire in what was called incendiary bombs. They'd fire them up on Mount Cervacci. As they rolled down, they'd light up the area where you could see. Well, he and I are this Ensign Henson, as I called him. He was, and here's why. He said, I said, "You remember those incendiary bombs that you'd light up?" "Yeah." He said, "You know who did that?" And I said, "No." That old Ensign Henson. He said, the next morning after when I went down for breakfast to the galley, the old skipper called me over and said, "Ensign Henson, I wanted you to light up the area so we could watch troop movement, but I didn't want you to light up so well we could read the morning paper." So he and I laughed about that many, many times. He was Ensign Henson, a great fellow here in Fort Collins, a great surgeon. Well, anyway, that's another sea story.
Well, while we're still at Emo, could you talk a little bit about, particularly from your position there at the front of the boat, what your view was like? What were you seeing as far as on the beach? And you talked about, you saw the raising the flag. If you could tell these stories.
Yes, I did. Yeah, well, see, I was in the forward part of the ship, and we were at that time was, let me say as much as maybe a quarter of a mile off of Mount Cervacci and the beach, standing by to unload. And so we could see all the things taking place. There was one time that a Japanese plane came over that and hit. We had, the only way we could get fuel for those vehicles once they got aboard or ashore was through barrels of fuel. And we carried a lot of barrels on board with one of our trips. That's another story. But anyway, there was, I don't know how many, let me just guess at it and say at least 100 barrels of diesel in one spot on the beach, just a little ways off the beach there. Well, this Japanese came in, strafing the beach with his backpack and hit that, of course. And you could see barrels flaming and just like, I don't know how to describe them, but they fly in the air, exploding. Just with, I don't know whether we had any fuel left in that thing, whether it was all through or not, but they were just rolling everywhere. Well, anyway, you could see things like that. You could see the movement. You could see where our troops were stopped. And many of them were, there was a jam, what you'd call today a traffic jam, on the beach because they couldn't get, see that sinking sand was the next problem, poor devils. And what did get there, that was the next problem. A lot of times they couldn't get the vehicle to get on through that sand. I swear I don't know how we finally managed to get them all up there, but we did. Finally secured the island, but remember this little island, I didn't think it was 5 miles long. You could see the whole island where I was. And that's what this Marine I talked about earlier, he was up there just watching what was going on, see. And it couldn't have been in a, you know, a bullet could have went on past, it could have went by, could hit anything, but it hit him, of all things. Yeah. It was just his time, is the only thing I can say. And it just messed him up. But anyway, my point is that we could see the whole thing taking place like it was in a grandstand review place. And that's when I saw the flag go up, and we thought, boy, we got it. We got it. And it wasn't long, but it disappeared. We thought, well, I guess they came out and took it back, you know, the Japanese. That wasn't true. What happened is they wanted to put up, the first flag that went up that was not the picture that Rosenthal, I think you know that story. It was not the picture of Rosenthal, and there were several photographers there besides Rosenthal, by the way, that's how the story goes. Well, anyway, they wanted a larger flag and a more secure, so there's an argument and I've been with this, around this argument, between two LSTs as to which one furnished the big flag. One of them furnished one and the other furnished the other one, and so anyway, I've heard some of their own personnel on those ships argue as to which ship put up the big one. But one of them put up, and they had a temporary pole. It wasn't very much when they first put the first one up. So they took that down. It didn't come down. They took it down and put this larger one up, and with a more secure pole. And in all fairness, the story goes that was, in simple terms, staged so he could get this picture. And that he did. And of course we're glad he did. But it was the actual thing. But on the other hand, they delayed some time of putting that up while he got ready to film it all. He took several pictures apparently of that, all that, what's going on. Well, we saw all that. Naturally, we couldn't see the men very well to tell what that particular story was, but we saw the flag go up, saw it disappear, thought we was attacked again, and then saw the new one come up. So I'd have to guess, I don't know, maybe 300 yards off of the beach, somewhere like that at that time. Not very far off the beach.
In some of your earlier landings, did you come under the enemy shelling?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Well, now, we never knowingly, unless that one that I talked about with this poor Marine,
yeah,
we never took a bullet from the Japanese. I'll tell you, they had I have a picture of this, a sunken Japanese ship out there, and it had a smokestack that was still, I guess, out. Well, we wondered how they could be so dadgummed accurate with some of their attacks that they'd come back with, how they could tell where we were, although it was a small area. Well, later, I think it was D+3 or somewhere along in there, they discovered what was called a forward observer. An observer was laying in that smokestack, and he was calling back the fire. That's the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So we really didn't get into any fire from the shore. And I never heard any stories of anyone on the ships that caught anything. They were more protecting what was coming aboard, coming ashore. But I was going to say something else about that. That one case that we learned about that's where he was calling so dadgone accurate on what was coming ashore, and they were able to zero in right on what was happening to us, you see. And that's a good part of the sad story of what was going on with Iwo Jima. It's just a terrible situation. But back to Okinawa, did I answer that question
yes.
for you? We could see it real well. Okinawa now. What we did, our job, along with some other LSTs, was to go in toward Naha, which was the south part of Okinawa. And we were sitting still, I should say, quite a ways off. I'd have to say 2 miles maybe, something like that. And our job, I said we had 2 LCVPs, one on each side. We loaded on some seamen, and I don't know, might have been 2 or 3 Marines got aboard, but that wasn't their purpose. Our instructions, we lowered the 2 small boats, and this was going on with other ships out there at that time. Their instructions was to go toward the beach, and there's a picture of that. I think I showed you the little streaks. Mm-hmm. That's what that is. Our instructions to them, to what was called the coxswain of the boat, was to go in till they begin to receive some fire, turn around and come back, and that we did. But what was really taking place, which was very important, that they learned from Iwo Jima, the Army, in this case, not the Marines, was coming on the north end, and they were able to establish
Foothold?
pardon?
A foothold?
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
because there's nothing. They didn't encounter a thing up there, and they was able to come down that north end while we were faking the landing. That was the idea. We were faking the landing.
Oh, okay.
To go into the main part, which was Naha. Naha was a large city there. And that was very effective. We got by real well with that. Even our boys didn't get any shells, but they were shelled from shore. But Okinawa was, of course, considerably different. The whole ballgame, number one, they learned several things at Iwo Jima that they hadn't practiced. Number one, in our case, they had these 27 ducks. I don't think they used ducks at all. We didn't have any going in Okinawa. And number two, which this is a very sad part of the Iwo Jima encounter, they decided they'd get more use out of the Marines if the Marines didn't have to drive their own vehicles. And at that time, they assigned, frankly, a black company as their drivers. Very poorly trained. It wasn't their fault, it just poorly trained. They didn't know what to do once the motor stopped. All they could do is drive it, see. And that caused a lot of catastrophes, in all fairness. No disrespect at all to the poor colored boys, but that's what happened. We had them aboard ship, and they, by the way, had to sleep up on top deck while the Marines slept below deck, in my case. It was very bad, but they learned, they meaning the big wigs, that wasn't a very good practice. They didn't do it when it came to Okinawa. Furthermore, they faked the landing. That gave our Army a good foothold in the north end, and they came down without any kind of encounter until they got about almost halfway down the island, or maybe further than that, I don't know, but they got an easy foothold there. While we, the LSTs mainly, I don't know any other ships that did that, we had APAs. One of our APAs, you know, I have to say, I don't remember whether this is Okinawa or Iwo Jima. What the APA had the rest of our Marines on board. That's personnel. They couldn't go aboard couldn't go ashore like we could. And so they had all their gear and the rest of their personnel that couldn't get aboard our ship with their gear. But this APA 120 took a kamikaze. That's one that had to, I think that was Okinawa. We had more kamikaze in Okinawa than we did Iwo Jima, by the way. They were just getting started with that.
Starting to get desperate.
Yes. Well, anyway, they took a kamikaze plane, but they were off to our right a little ways. Missed our ship, hit them. And this is something that I'll never forget. That the silhouette of how that plane, how it could get through the hull of that ship. It went into the engine room. That was their purpose, of course. Disengage the engine in a fire. They had to abandon most of it. They was able to save it. They kept it going. And LST 888 also did the same thing in our convoy. Now they abandoned it. Finally towed it back to Hawaii. We saw it when we came back from Hawaii. But they abandoned it. But the APA they didn't have to abandon as they would survive. But we had to take all what we could. We had about 1,000 troops aboard at one time, and we were running out of water and food both. But we was able to manage to get through it. Yeah. The rest of our Marines that we had on Okinawa were on an APA 120. They took a kamikaze plane, as I said. So we had to take them off. Well, we had 1,000 men aboard. We weren't. We had them all over the ship, laying on cots, laying on deck, everywhere they could lay, until we finally was able to discharge them. But what really was bothering us is we were running out of food and certainly running out of water. We never couldn't take showers. We'd turn on the ship fitters would turn on the water for us to get a drink every once in a while, but everybody knew that's when you drank the water and you didn't get anything else. So we was able to, after we discharged, we went on down to the Philippines and restocked. That doesn't seem like a very big trip. I don't know how far it was, but a day or two maybe, and we were down in the Philippines. But anyway, that's the story. The APA 120 and the LST 888 each took kamikaze planes. And we helped fire into the kamikaze planes. There's 2 or 3 landed right in our aft of our deck, right by us in the aft part of our deck. We took some of the shrapnel from them that when they exploded. We took more kamikaze planes in Okinawa. From the Japanese viewpoint, they had a place that they were building those in the north part of Japan. And they'd have ceremonies, you probably have heard this one, of those poor pilots that would dedicate their lives, and they're going to stay with, in some cases, a small boat, they did that. But most of the ones that hit us or around us were the kamikaze planes. And we had several names for them, of course. That's the way it was. But anyway, we were credited with knocking down 2 or 3, helping knock down 2 or 3 our gunner's mates on board ship. We had 20 millimeter and 40 millimeter. And by the way, I have a lamp here, 2 of them, that was made from the cases of the 40 millimeters. This lamp I made into a lamp after I was back home. This is a 40 millimeter. These are 20s. Supposedly these 20s weren't fired. The 40 was. I picked these up later, and when you see the red here, that was a tracer. About every 5th 20 millimeter. We did some of it, but not as much with the 40 millimeter. So the boys would know where their fire was going.
A tracer lit up, correct?
Yeah, these would light up into the target when they go into the target. Well, of course, these weren't fired. I picked them up later, but this one was actually fired. I have 2 of these, and I sent this home just as you'd see it here, without the light and without the base. I sent it home to my wife, and I'll be honest, I think they came, I was down in the Philippines, somewhere after Iwo Jima, and of course it was difficult to ship anything of any significance, but I was able to ship this shell with a stainless steel base. And that was all it had, and these shells. They were mounted, my ship fitters on my ship mounted it for me. And I shipped this back to my wife for our first wedding anniversary. And then later, in civilian life, I run this off as a base, made a lamp out of them.
Made 2.
That's the story of those. Those were actually fired. That 40 millimeter was actually fired at aircraft on Iwo Jima. Now, I'm kind of, as a little boy said, Vichy Vaci between Iwo Jima and Okinawa. But anyway, Okinawa was the last invasion we made. And actually the last invasion that the U.S. made. We did make, as I said, I think 3 trips into Tokyo Bay to haul troops.
Occupation troops?
Occupation troops, thank you very much. And we floated out one typhoon there, a drug anchor, and had to reposition. It was cold at that time. It was in October. Cold. See, we finally came home We arrived back in San Francisco on December the 31st. I had enough points. We got off, was discharged or released. I was just released to inactive duty. But we had enough points once I got back that I could go. Plus I had 30 days liberty to go home. During that 30 days, my discharge came through and I went down to New Orleans to be discharged. I had gone back and went back into school at East Central to finish my first degree. And my wife and I took her along with me. We went down and flew down to New Orleans. Spent a few days right after the Mardi Gras. It just ended there. And anyway, I flew right back and got right back into school to finish that in May of that year. Now, I have a picture of the ship that I don't know whether you want to put on it or not. I have these here. My wife and I, she was so sweet about it. She would write each day. This is February 28th, 1945. I'll say back to Saipan. Oh, and I talk about ship fitter Allred. We've got a, I may have said this, and forgive me if I did. This was a ship fitter that was hit when a Marine was killed on board a ship. He took some, we called it shrapnel, and we had to ship them off. But anyway, they sent us a Purple Heart for Allred, and we didn't know where it was. We never did see him anymore, so we had to get it back to the powers that be. These letters, I just pulled them out. This one's November. This is headed, I was in Leyte in the Philippines, and I headed back getting things ready. We made our 3 trips into Yokohama to unload the occupation trips. I was concerned as to how I was going to get home. Well, I wound up and brought the ship back. While we were over there, another little side story. Our skipper was a full lieutenant, and he had owned 2 fishing boats, pretty good sized fishing boats apparently, and the Navy took them over. He was mad about it. And I don't blame him, of course, that was his living. He was a Portuguese. He had a restaurant there in San Diego, doing quite well, and decided to join the Navy, I guess. But he was old enough to, when he got 40 years old as a civilian in the Navy, they tried to get rid of us. And I can see why, because those days, you couldn't take it when you was 35 or 40, and some of the things we had to do in those days. But anyway, he was, his congressman, before we went overseas, his congressman had got an appointment with Secretary of the Navy. He is headed back to Washington, D.C. to see if he could get out of the Navy. After he got in, he decided he wasn't happy with it. And so he tells the story. We thought it was very funny. He tells the story that he caught a train and headed back to Washington, D.C., and about the second day out, the SOB died. That was Secretary Knox. And he said it, and said, well, looked like he could live just long enough. I'd have got there anyway. But he didn't. So he didn't get out of the Navy, and that's when they assigned him to our ship. Then our exec was a lieutenant, junior grade, and then the rest of us were ensigns, young ensigns from various places. And as I said, I was third in command on the thing. Well, anyway, the skipper finally got, I think it was after Okinawa, pretty sure it was, he got orders to be shipped back to the States and be released. At which time they moved the exec up to the skipper. and moved me up to the exec position. So from there on until we got back into San Francisco, I was actually the navigation officer for the ship and the executive officer. Didn't get any more promotion. That rank didn't mean a thing, but got a lot of responsibilities. I thought I had enough when I was a lieutenant on the deck. He's called first lieutenant. With all the crazy things that took place, I talk about them in some of these letters. Something to talk about. With all the various little things that took place daily. And I thought I worked pretty hard with various. A lot of it was with personnel problems with them, either fights, their girlfriends. They'd get a letter from a girlfriend or maybe a wife, and something had happened. Why, it just tear them up, of course. And I tried to be the counselor, so to speak, to listen to their stories and try to help them out a little bit. Because I was married and had a wonderful wife at that time. Now, I'm wondering, I'm winding down, pal, on what I need to talk about.
Well, I'll pepper you with a lot of questions when you're ready. Yeah, when
okay.
You're ready with.
There's one more little story. You asked what happened on VJ Day. Where was I? What did I do? What did we do? That also is a little story that I think is interesting. When we were going in, the first time that we were going in to unload on Iwo Jima, we hit something very solid. Whether it was a rock or whether it was a sunken ship. There were several sunken ships around there. Something. It knocked a big hole in the bow of our ship. And from that time on until the war was over, we just had a ballast filled with water on one side, and we filled the other side, ballast on the other side just to keep balance. But we still had this big hole. Well, as we were getting prepared, frankly, to go to Kyushu in the invasion of Japan. So all of our focus was going toward that at this point in our experiences. And what they did to us, shipped us back to Saipan. And we beached on what's called high water, and then so the idea was so we could get as far on the beach as we could. So we went in and beached on the north part of Saipan, and then waited till low tide. I couldn't think of high tide they call it. Low tide, when the tide went back out. Well, then there's some welders came around the ship and welded a patch on this big hole we had. Well, we were able to get off and pick up shells. I still have some of those little shells I picked up to make my wife a necklace. We could have walked the beach, which we never, we thought it was God in heaven to get to walk on land, but we hadn't been on land we was out there 15 months on that ship, and rarely during all that time did we ever get on land, and so we thought old terra firma was pretty good. Well, anyway, they told us if we get off the ship to carry our gas masks. They knew something was happening with Japan, but they didn't know what exactly back in where we were, at least. They were afraid they may be coming out with a gas war, in all fairness. I don't know whether you've heard that story or not, but that's right. They were afraid that they might be coming out with gas. And so they made us, when we walked that beach, to carry our gas masks that we all had been issued, of course. And so we stayed there on the beach and was on the beach when word came that Japan was surrendering. And when that word, there were some other ships along the beach around that Saipan at that time where we were. And all hell broke loose. The ships were firing. there's pictures. I've got a picture right over there. You can see the tracers. They're so thick you can't even hardly see anything.
Kind of like a fireworks display,
yeah,
more or less.
There's some little accident happens too. It didn't happen to us, but some of them got a little bit crazy with some of their celebrations. But I'm telling you, the whole island lit up when the word finally came that Japan was surrendering. So that's what happened where I was. For some reason, I will remember it was about the 10th day of September, 10th day of August. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
One of those, I lose track of the time.
What were you? What were your thoughts when you finally heard? We dropped the atomic bomb.
Yeah.
Hey, any idea? I mean, through your mind, could you fathom the thought of this huge bomb doing that kind of destruction? I mean, what?
Well, we could. In all fairness, in my mind, see, we kept up with the bombers. Let me give another example. When we were in Saipan, getting ready to go to Iwo Jima, that was a B-29. They had a B-29 landing there. We'd count, interestingly, when we were there ready to know where we was going, we would count early in the morning those B-29s as they'd leave. We'd count about 3 to 5 o'clock sometime along there in the evening as they came back. And they never totaled the same, of course, as you know. But that was another thing that we were doing for entertainment during that particular point of time. Well, now, as a result of all that, we knew about everything that was going on. See, they brought old big boy, I guess it was, or little boy, forget, wasn't Saipan, it's a little while off of that, Saipan. I can't remember. And I've talked to a friend who was there and when this happened. They dug a big hole to put this bomb into. And I wish I could tell you the item, but it skips me right now. It's right inside Pan is where they were to do all this. And they put it in a hole, and dug a big hole, and lowered it in it because it was so dangerous, I guess, you know. Mm. And then they brought on the Etola Gay over that and loaded it that way in there. You probably have heard that story, but yeah, I can tell you the person that gave you the first-hand story.
Is that right?
His name is Cardell Webster. He lives here in Fort Collins. He's about 88 years old, but he was there as one of the pilots. We've talked about this several times, but he describes the whole thing that took place. Well, anyway, we could get enough on radio that we knew pretty well where we were insofar as Japan was concerned. Remember, though, we were at that point still getting ready to invade Japan. Thank God that for Japan and us that we didn't do that. That would have been the nastiest thing that's ever happened in this whole world.
Well, from your perspective, let me ask you this question too, in your thoughts. I mean, since then, there's been controversy as whether we should have dropped the bomb or not. Your viewpoint on that?
It's very biased.
Yeah.
They did, in our opinion, so many sneaky things as the Japanese, such as even Hawaii. He does it. Such as the Hawaii invasion. Now you see, looking back, they had us. If they wanted to invade the United States, I don't know what we'd have done. Our little old pistols wouldn't have done a thing. But for some reason, God only knows, they decided not to go ahead and invade us. But as you also know, they were wanting to own all of the islands in the Pacific. That was their objective. And from my viewpoint, see, we let Tojo, no, wait a minute, not Tojo. Tojo was hanged. Emperor.
Hirohito?
What?
Hirohito?
Hirohito. Yeah. We let him continue life. And it was MacArthur's idea, and probably rightfully so, that Hirohito got to stay. But you see, he didn't what power he had. They claimed he didn't have much power. What power he had, he didn't try to stop that invasion. He knew it. And yet, when it got all through, we let him go, let him remain as the prime minister. And that hits a sore spot a little bit, in a way, but it was probably best for civilization at that time that we let him go. The rest of them, Tojo and the various other ones, some of them committed suicide, but others that we, including Tokyo Rose, she was put in prison and brought back to Chicago. Well, anyway, she had nothing to do with what was going on with the war except the propaganda. But my vision at that time, I was so tired of that part of the world, and my letters indicate that when you read them, that I'd done anything to get back home. I tried to get into the submarines, thinking I might go that way and come back home for retraining. Thank goodness they didn't take me. Well, anyway, we were tired of that, so tired of the water and the guns and all the things that was taking place over there that we were so pleased when we found out that Japan had taken an atomic bomb. We celebrated. We were ready for them to drop a dozen more, and we were ready to do that apparently from the U.S. viewpoint. Now you see Roosevelt, we talk about that. I remember so well the day he died, the 12th of April, 1945. He was my idol. I'll never forget hearing him say that Adonai hates war, I hates war, we all hates war. I was in school at that time, of course, but he was a good president. He was the one that brought America back to life. Whether you're a Democrat or Republican, I don't care. He brought a lot of federal. Well, he helped my dad pay for the farm, survive in the farm with a federal loan, quite frankly. The only loan Dad ever took in his life. But anyway, things like that. I was, in fact, supposed to go to an NYA camp where I was just worked on what was used to be called CCC. We had that at Fort Sill. And I was, after graduating, I was headed that way until I decided to go to had a grandmother that lived in Ada. My friend said, "Don't you have a grandmother over there at Ada?" I said, "Where we're going to go to school?" He said, "Let's go to Ada. Don't you have a grandmother there?" "Yeah." "Can we stay with her?" "Yeah." About 100 miles away. Well, anyway, back to the stories of the war. We were, of course, quite pleased from our viewpoint that we didn't know what it meant, except we knew it was a dangerous bomb. Because we'd been bombing Tokyo and that whole part day and night before that, just plain bombs. And so from the viewpoint of getting in bombing Tokyo, that was our objective, to get everything we could do. And today, I wouldn't want us to have a nuclear war, naturally. But in my opinion, Japan invited that. That's all I can say. Mm-hmm. They were, why they didn't go ahead and take our Hawaii and land on the United States, I don't know today. I've wondered many times why they didn't go ahead, because they had us. We didn't have anything left of any significance to defend ourselves. As you know, all the coastlines went dark. They couldn't have lights. We couldn't either. We couldn't have smoked a cigarette or anything out on board ship because we'd give our identification away. Well, what else can I say about the end of the war? I did say that where we were at the end of the war, the day that it was declared, and what we were doing.
When you were part of dropping off occupation forces, were you able to go on land? And
yes.
What was that like?
Well, that's interesting too. We couldn't at first. all the time we were there, in fact, Tokyo was out of bounds for us. It was not, we couldn't go to Tokyo. I went to Yokohama, went into Yokohama, and saw the big buildings. When we went into Tokyo Bay, as it was, which is by Yokohama, why, I'll never forget seeing guns, cannons, I guess, stashed all along the beach. They were there. They were just, see, they had trained their women and their kids to do anything they could to keep us from taking over Japan. And so there'd have been, you talk about millions killed, both us and them. We couldn't have taken a step hardly anywhere that we wouldn't have been in danger. Well, by the same token, we had just bombed the holy hell out of them if they'd have kept going. We were all for those atomic bombs, and we'd have wiped out Japan as it was. So that's how we felt about the war, about Japan. Now, let me say to you today, after I got home and was able to recover and get my senses kind of back to normal, I didn't hold the Japanese, and there's some great ones here in America. As you know, they formed a battalion or something. I think they sent them to Europe.
Italy.
Italy, okay. They were fine people. I've lived with and hired some of the finest Japanese people you could ever find. I have good friends today. I get Christmas cards from them. When I was coming back from North Carolina, I wanted to see me when she comes back, one of my students that I had. I had a secretary who lives here. She and I are going to get together for lunch one of these days. I was, interestingly, and this sounds like a bragging, and if it is, it is. When I was superintendent of schools down a little place called Swink, Colorado, down in the Arkansas Valley, went there as a coach teacher and finished my master's while I was there, and the board came to me after the superintendent moved to Holyoke, asked me if I'd be the superintendent. So I was broke into the superintendent there. Well, anyway, I used to referee Sunday afternoons. They had a Japanese basketball team, and they'd want to come up and play in the gym. I'd open it up, go up and referee for them and play with them. And anyway, and I gave them an American flag from the school. They had a little organization down there that they'd meet frequently in Lahana. Well, a fellow named Everett Marshall, who was a world champion wrestler, had a Lou Thez. He had a feed yard, big feed yard down there in Lahana, just south of Swink, and he was a good friend. Well, Everett died up here in Fort Collins. His neck was, he didn't have a neck straight. But he was a world champion wrestler. Okay. Well, anyway, they had a banquet in Lahana one spring while I was down there, and Everett and I were their guests. And they gave us, I forgot what all, but they honored us by working with them. So my point in telling you all that, I'm not anti-Japanese at all today. It hurt, and we called them a lot of different names when they attacked us. And we thought they were very, very sneaky, and basically they were. But that's not what the Japanese people really wanted. It was those high-powered people that I don't know really what they thought they was going to do. But anyway, my attitude is today, that wasn't what the Japanese citizen really wanted. That wasn't at all what those was already in America. I play golf with one today. I go to church with one. He fixes dinner every once a month and called double nickel, 55 and above. and ones like that are just fine people. And I got out to Haxton, the superintendent out there after I left Swing. I just got up there, and one day I went to the mailbox, and here was a crate of great Rocky Ford melons,
Hmm.
shipped by I don't know, one of the Japanese family. Things like that. So
Yeah.
I don't have.
Was there any worries though when you part of the occupation force on land? Was there still worries because they were so fanatical that there
Yeah.
might have been reprisals from
Yes.
civilians? I mean, how
Yeah.
was the interaction, or did you even interact with any of the civilians when you were on land?
No, not as such. Here's the way, I have a picture of this, I think, somewhere. What our attitude was then is they were enemies, of course.
Yeah.
We didn't trust them. And when we were walking down the streets, wanted to get some, which I did, a few little old souvenirs from that area. Many of them would be sitting along the curves, along the street, along the walks, smoking pot, by the way.
Hmm.
Oh yeah. And this is what was interesting to us and hateful, we thought. Well, anyway, when we'd go by, well, they'd bow to us, which in my opinion is a bunch of malarkey. They'd bow to us. You get 10 steps ahead of them, they begin to laugh, make fun of you. You can see that everywhere you went. I don't blame them in a way, see, because after all, we had taken over their land. But that's the way it was. That was my attitude, what I saw there at that time. And I didn't appreciate it, obviously. I can understand why they were doing it, because, we were the enemy to them. Well, it was, from a viewpoint of, feeling comfortable, no way. We didn't. But we wanted to see what we could see. And so they let us go as far as we could go. We just had to walk, of course. And I have some pictures taken of some of that. I didn't take them. One of the officers that came aboard our ship a little later was able to come aboard with a camera, and he had his camera with him. He could take some of it. But that was what I saw there, and it was anything but nice, I guess you'd say. It just was fearful all the way. Well, as I think I said, we flat didn't trust them, because they had proven to us beforehand that they weren't to be trusted. And so that was still living in our minds and what they were doing to us, those kamikaze planes, things like that. I don't know, I guess kamikaze is just as eligible as a gun would be to fire or protect yourself, but it just seemed like to us it wasn't a war. You think of a foot war, but it wasn't a foot war. Well, anyway, that was my general feeling. It always has been. What's happened up there, what it looked like. I didn't have it real bad, luckily. I was there, but I say today the good Lord must have thought I deserved some more mistreatment, so he wanted me to live a little longer. That's not really the case, but, he had something. He didn't think I'd earned a chance to live with him yet. Well, I think that's most of what I had put down as notes down through here.
All right. Well, let me.
Into the bill, the GI Bill. I took advantage of that and proud of it. Got 2 degrees out of it. Should have got the 3rd one. I didn't.
And you went on to a career in education?
Yes. I say right here, I borrowed a car. I don't remember whose car, because folks had a car that I had bought while I was in school. Because I worked for the county one summer and I had to have a car. Dad resented it because he had an old Model A that wouldn't go. The radiator was stopped up. I had to have a car doing survey of farms, is what I was doing for the control conservation. So I say I borrowed a car on that, and that was it, because they took it over when I left home. And got in a little late, but they said I'd be all right, so they let me get in school, and I finished that one semester. I worked while I was in, I worked in shop. Received my bachelor's degree there. I'm covering it up. Well, then after I got out, I finished my degree. I had worked, I had about, I'm not sure, 30 to 60 youngsters, young people under me, all the time I was on board ship. And I was tired of having to help be their chaplain, counselor. I wanted to do my own stuff. I wanted to get on with my life, my wife, start our family, which we did. And so when I got out and finished my degree, I didn't know what I was going to do. So I decided I wanted to be a draftsman, an industrial arts major. I was about as poor a draftsman as you could find. But they gave me a job, temporary job at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, making field manuals of refiguring buildings to be painted and various things like that. That's what I did. Never so bored in my life. Never so bored in my life. Well, I'd catch a bus with my little dinner pail and go out to that dang Fort Sill. I had to work at it to stay awake. So I got a letter, we got a letter from some people who my wife lived with there in Lawton just before, while I was overseas. And they had moved to Pueblo. He was working for Coca-Cola. And so they sent a clipping out of the Pueblo paper. It said, "Coach wanted at Avondale, Colorado." Pay was $2,900, and I was drawing $2,600. I thought, I had a little leave time, a little vacation time. Had an old '39 Chevy, was bought, used. And so I said to the wife, let's go out in Colorado. We'd never been to Colorado. So we drove out here. Went out to Avondale, no, I skipped the point. Avondale had hired somebody to be their coach, and I didn't get it. But all I had was a sheet, and I don't think I even had my transcript at that time, just a letter. Told what I was doing. And so Boone, Superintendent Boone, Colorado, down on Highway 50 there, yeah, sent me a telegram, offer you coaching job, coaching, teaching, $2,300. I think it was 23. I said, let's go out and look at that. So we came out here and stayed with these folks. And I went out there, and all I could see was, all I could smell was rotten onions. It was a farm area. And all I could see were Mexicans. Now, I'm not against Mexicans in any light, but I had never lived with them. I lived with Indians. And I thought, I don't think so. So I went back into the place. Oh, the superintendent said to me, well, you know, if you don't want to come here, there's 5 other jobs open in this county. Anybody that had a degree who had a sail-in. So anyway, I went back and called the superintendent, and he said, yeah, come on over. So I went over to the county superintendent. He said, yeah, there's a job open at Lakeside Vineland. Superintendent came in while I was there and interviewed me, offered me the job. I said, thanks very much. Pleasant View, another one there, it had a job open. I said, thank you very much. And they said, well, there's one at Rye. And when I told these folks that I had a chance to go to Rye, they thought that was heaven. Because Rye is a nice little vacation area up in the mountains. But I said, okay. So I went up, looked up the superintendent, and he is logging up at San Isabel, Lake San Isabel, up 10 miles up the way. I looked him up, and we talked a little bit. Didn't really get into anything serious. I just told him what I'd been and what I'd done. He said, well, if you want to call me in the morning, I was ready to go home. You want to call me in the morning, I'll let you know, board's meeting tonight. I'll let you know whether you have a contract. And I said, okay. So I went to a pay station that next morning and called him, and he said, yeah, if you want to come up, we'll give you a contract for $2,500. Okay, I took it. That's how we got to Colorado, 1947. And I say I'm a CIO because of that now. That's a Colorado Improved Okie.
Oh.
Since '47 we've lived out here, of course. But, you know, the Okies weren't very well thought of in California.
Right, yeah.
My wife didn't like that, but I thought it was funny. Barbara pulled it on me once, and I thought, oh, that's okay. I've used it a lot of times to get a big giggle out of it. So that's my story and how I got out in Colorado.
And then you took a number of positions throughout the state?
Yeah, then I was at Rye 3 years and had 2 superintendents in the 3 years I was there. I was in a neutral position. See, I was about 25 at that time. And, you know, there's all kind of things going on. I won't get into that because that's civilian stuff. But I was in a neutral position. I took my first team to the state tournament that I was there that year. The other 2 years we got into the district. I wore one team out. I just run them to death. And they retired. Anyway, I had good teams. And I was very popular, in all fairness, up there. I looked at going over to San Luis Valley. I didn't know anybody knew it but me. But some way or another, one of the merchants got a wind of it and told the board that I was going over for an interview. Well, he got to the board. I wasn't going to sign a contract. I was still going to school at Oklahoma State to get my master's in the summer. So I was going to go back to school. Well, they came to me and they offered me a whole $300, I believe it was, $2,800 for the year, of course, I'm talking about. But naturally, what helped me a lot was the GI Bill, in all fairness. I do about $115, $105, and $115 a month, and that was enough to take care of us to we go to school. So anyway, that was how we got into Colorado. I went down to Swink, was offered a job down there, which is $3,000 at that time. And a fellow that had seen my team play in La Junta at the district tournament. And he says, he's dead today, but he said in public, that he saw my team and he thought, that's the coach I'd sure like to have. He was very much a Christian fellow. And I had taught the boys sportsmanship. We used to go down to the Trinidad tournament, and we got the sportsmanship trophy every year for good conduct. Well, anyway, I went down and applied, and he says today, he said, just before he died, in fact, in my retirement, he didn't realize who he was talking to when I went down for an interview. He didn't know that was the guy he said he wanted. And sure enough, I became his coach. I came at the Swink and stayed 9 years there as superintendent, coached 3 years, and then went into that. And everything was great there, just fine. I didn't have any problems. Got into the Ford Foundation to get some money, help the little school out, things like that. So I had an offer from this Lynch, his name, went to Holyoke as superintendent. He kept on that board at Haxton, which is a school there in Phillips County, 2 schools, to come get me to be superintendent up here. They came 2 years before I finally came up. I said, no, 2 years, because I had a pretty good deal down here. We'd built a house. The railroad had given us a house for the principal. We moved it up and remodeled it. There's a farm that we bought the farm adjacent to the school, acreage there, an alfalfa field. It had a house on it. We remodeled it for us, my family and I. So I had a real good deal. Well, anyway, they finally convinced me 2 years later what had happened. And I don't know whether this is important for you here or not, but when they came up, I had a secretary, part-time secretary, good one. One of them was Japanese at that time too. And good house to live in. Well, up at Hoxton, they didn't have a house. It's hard to find a house up there then. And I went up to visit with them 2 years earlier. They didn't have a house and didn't have a superintendent. And I said, heck, I got a better deal than you got already. 2 years later, here they came. Said, we got a house for you. They built a house. They built it. And a secretary, a full-time secretary. I said, okay, I'd done about all I could do down there, so I was ready to move. So I spent 7 years up there, and they was great years. Consolidated, built an elementary school. Just everything was great. Great families out there. Still have good friends. Well, I was offered a job by the superintendent up here to take over the federal programs. They were just, after Kennedy's assassination, they were public schools. The only federal money we had at that time was what's called Smith-Hughes Act, and that was the vocational education. And that was high school. When Kennedy was assassinated, he had several ideas. He's quite a bit like Roosevelt was on what helping the poor, in all fairness. And so there's a lot of federal money coming into public schools then. So schools like Fort Collins was hiring people like me that had experience as principals or superintendents somewhere, that they wanted to take over the federal programs because there's a lot of money. They needed people who could manage budget because of manage the money. They had to be careful how they use it. They had to write up a program about it. And a person that had some experience with teachers. Well, I had frankly good experience with them. I had a real good school out there, no kidding at all. And so they came to me, the superintendent called me one morning, right after I had a track meet. I was on the Colorado High School Activities Association at that time. And as a result, I had a lot of responsibilities with other schools. Well, anyway, he called me and said he'd like me to come up. I said, you might want to send a couple of your men up and see what I have. No, we know what you got. So come up and they offered me the job. I moved up here, we moved up here. That's the end of the story.
Okay. Well, let me ask you a couple questions, and then we'll wind down the interview. I guess my first question is, as a good old boy, farm boy from Oklahoma, what was, I don't imagine, aside from maybe seeing your grandma and going off to college, you traveled too much growing up. What was that like going to the East Coast, the big New York cities, to being on the ocean, to seeing exotic islands? What was that through your eyes, to experience that?
That's interesting. It's an interesting question because you've got it right. Little old boy that we went to Oklahoma City one summer to visit an uncle and aunt there, and other than going to Lawton or Duncan, I'd never been out of town. See, I had been to Oklahoma City playing basketball, of course, when I was a kid in high school there. We had a tournament up there. But that's all. State Fair in Oklahoma was up there. That was something great. But other than that, never been out of the state. By the way, my folks were both born in Oklahoma IT, Oklahoma Indian Territory. They were both born in Oklahoma Indian Territory. And so that tells you kind of what the situation was there. The farm was owned by a fine lady, Ida Goody was her name. She was a teacher in Arizona. And so Dad bought the first 80 acres when he and Mom married. I was the oldest child, born about a year after they were married. And so anyway, that was a lot of our close relationship with the good Indians. Indians had their trouble. Anyway, Dad finally bought the rest of the farm after the war. Another 80 acres. A dryland farm. And anyway, now, from a viewpoint of how I felt, it was an experience. It was just something that I wanted to see everything I could see. I was a baseball fan. I thought at one day I was going to be a Major League Baseball player with the Dizzy and Daffy days. Pepper Martin, they were from Oklahoma. They were my idols in baseball. I won't get into that. But anyway, I thought I wanted to play some baseball. I did play American Legion baseball enough. But then what I wanted to do, the reason I got into baseball, I wanted to see a Major League Baseball game. And I got to see the Boston Braves, Chicago Cubs when I was in midshipman school. they caught a foul ball nearby me, and they were saying over the PA system, throw the balls back so we can give them to the veterans. Well, here I sit in my uniform, and this person caught that ball and wanted to know if I wanted it. Yeah. So I got a baseball, hit by Ed Stanky, foul ball. That was a great day. So my point is, I was a little boy, awed at big things, new things. And I tried to take advantage of all that I could. Went to some concerts and heard some things that never thought a country boy would do. Never forget the old boy, I can't think of his name now, McCormick. And he'd get up and lecture during a concert. He was an editor or something, I think, in Chicago. Well, as silly as it could be, an old farm kid that didn't know anything, I went to some of those just to hear. Took in everything I could, especially Chicago. Norfolk was a hell's born place. It was real difficult mostly because of the racism. It was just not real nice. And I think you can talk to most any sailor and they'll tell you that, and most any soldier was around there too. But Virginia Beach was a great place for us. My wife and I, we rented a place there. Interesting how people would take care of us and treat us. Here, they knew I wasn't going to be a month or 2 months or 3 months, whatever. But we paid pretty high rent, I suspect, in that time. I couldn't tell you what it was. But on the other hand, they were kind to us to rent an apartment to us, you see. That was true in Portsmouth, Virginia Beach, which was Norfolk. Didn't rent the hotel in Boston, hotel in San Diego, so I guess I couldn't say that. One of my other experiences along that line, you talk about being awed with the time, the buildings and the experience. Christmas time in Norfolk, when we was there, of course we didn't get to go home, but during the formation ran in the mornings, we'd have to get out, fall in line, get muster and so forth. Why, they would call out that so-and-so and so-and-so, tickets for this, tickets for that, and we could take advantage of it. Well, what I did, were just before about Christmas Day, I guess it was, they offered for some of us to go into some homes and be with some families for Christmas dinner. So one of my friends and I took this family up and went to Norfolk. And they were so nice. I wish I knew them today. I'm sure they're long gone. But they fed us a nice meal. Then they offered us a chance to call home. We didn't have a telephone. It was embarrassing to me, to be real honest about it. Mm. I didn't tell them that my folks didn't have a telephone. I just said, no, thank you. I don't think so. They couldn't understand why. They were going to pay for the telephone. Now, my buddy, if I'm recalling, I did make a call back to his place. He is from Ada. I think they had a telephone. He is staying with his grandparents because his dad and mother separated from him. Well, anyway, it was very embarrassing for that situation for me to have an offer to call home. Emotionally, I'm not too sure I could have done it anyway. Yeah. Just to be real honest about it. It was very emotional. Well, anyway, that's kind of how I saw things as a service person in those days.
How was it? Could you talk a little bit about war conditions? I mean, particularly someone like myself that has no idea what it's like to be in a war situation. The violence that's going on, like the kamikazes and such. How was that to be in the middle of that? How did you keep your wits about you in situations like that?
That's a tough question. Some of the boys did cook. That's where I was the chaplain, if you will, kind of the counselor that was listening to some of the fellows that was having trouble. But on the other hand, from my viewpoint, and I have to say to you that most of that wartime, all the wartime, I was married and I had a wonderful, sweet wife. If you could read the letters, you'd see that she was my strength day to day. So it was just unimaginable, I'd have to say to you. I cannot really describe it in a good fashioned way. I've talked about what things happened in certain situations, but I did not break down. My skipper did, by the way. He got a letter from his wife and he broke down. We had to help him out. But anyway, because of my wife, I was able to keep pretty good mentality. So, you know, you've got shells, blasts going on. It's, again, hard to describe. You see on the island, you see the things taking place, fellows being shot up. It's impossible to draw a picture. It was just survival. It's pretty all you can say. We I didn't worry a lot about it, quite frankly. I always said if I had a bunk, I had a good bunk. If I didn't have it, it was too late to worry about. That's just my attitude, the way I took it. And I've said that many times. But seeing what, let me say, other fellows go through right beside you was hard to describe. Impossible for me to describe because I break up too easily. I used not be able to even talk about any of that without doing what I'm doing now. And I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I just couldn't hold it. But it was just survival day to day in simple terms, including those typhoons. We went through one of them after we'd gone through about 4. We didn't think the ship would take it. You can't imagine what I've heard a fellow recently, somebody on board one of those, talk about it. When you'd hit a wave, and the waves, by the way, would be way over your ship. Ship over there would disappear. He'd go down and you'd be out. That's the way you'd see it.
And you guys would take it harder too because you were flat bottom. And
that's right.
Yeah.
And when we'd hit one of those waves, it's just like an accordion. You wonder how in the world can those things hold? We didn't figure it would. Rarely after the war, we were trying every way we could to get home. I could write you to show you some letters telling that. Because we thought we'd had it, if you will. But we got her all the way back to the San Francisco. Well, anyway, one of them, usually we had a lot of sick seamen, and anybody else aboard that we might have, they'd just be lying on the decks with their life jackets, sitting in Earp, you know. Luckily, I didn't have that trouble. But anyway, the ship, one of them we hit one of those waves, and the old sucker was just sitting there like that. Dishes was rattling, everything you could have was rattling. My assistant was in the bunk above me, and I was obviously half asleep when we hit that one particular wave. I came out of it, grabbed my life jacket, and I said, David, 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 she's going down. I lived through that at breakfast that next morning. But that's the way it went.
Yeah.
We thought that's the end of it.
Yeah.
What good Lord took care of us.
Yeah. You talk about the letters and the communications back and forth with your wife. In her letters or after the war, did she ever talk about, or even talking with your folks, how they coped with you over there? And
Yeah.
particularly when there would be huge gaps without letters, how did they cope with you being in harm's way? And
Yeah.
did they ever talk about that from their
Yeah,
end?
she'd write me a letter. It was one I read last night that she had been out. She went to church with somebody. Now, this is a country church, and we live 4 miles out. And Mother had come up and picked her up and took her down to the farm. And she spent the Sunday with them. And she said Mother was very happy. I don't know whether I can talk about it or not.
That's okay. We don't have to.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Anyway, at that time, she said, Mother just knew that I was gone, you know, but I wasn't. And she kept trying to build her up, but she said Mother was in a good mood, weak, for some reason. So it's things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
See, things were rationed, gasoline's rationed, sugar's rationed. Dad used to raise bees, and he'd get sugar for the bees, and they'd use it on the farm to eat. Now they'd give them the sugar for the bees to make honey. And anyway, that kind of thing was going on. I don't know whether I could. I don't know. That's one about the crew. Talk about the crew. And this is the laity. Plans to get home to get discharged. Plans to get a degree. Keeping duty. I was going to, I knew when I got home, and he landed back in the U.S., I was going to get out as fast as I could. And the skipper at that time, I was his exec. He was the same category. He was married too. He might have had one more point than I did, but he was able to get off. He said to me, "You're not going to get off before I do." So he and I went off together almost. Well, anyway, he had to get off by points, you know.
Yeah.
Married so
Right.
much, so many years, so much action. So I was going to, after we left Hawaii, I guess it was, I was going to resign the executive position, so I wouldn't have anything at all when I got landed over here. Well, I don't know, time went by and things, and I kept the exec until I did get here. A few days just before I came, I resigned and let the gunnery officer take over as that. He stayed with it till I got back over to Boston. Broke the sextant there. That's what I used to cite as Yokohama. I was thinking, I thought I had one of hers that I could kind of read you the very thing that I was trying to tell you. Let's see here, there's one maybe. Letter wanting me home. Let's see if that happens to be it. I destroyed, she was very mad at me, my wife, disgusted at me, I should say. There's a lot of them, and I went through them briefly, basically, to kind of, I wanted to keep the ones where I may have talked about where I was as best I could and what I was doing. Now let me see here. Went to town today, her sister and dad brought me 2 letters and a map showing the invasion of Japan, which didn't have to come. Let's see, they called, I guess if I, she said, "I'm very happy you're finally getting to come home." I was thinking, that wouldn't have been it. Now that I think about it, that wouldn't have been the letter. There's one of these letters that I ran into last night, and I don't know where I can find it now, where she wrote it. She had been down to the folks, and Mom was in good spirits. But they work together, so to speak, on what was happening, what was going on. Let's see what my note is here. These are letters from me heading home to the U.S. from Yokohama, Uladi, Honolulu, and Pearl Harbor. I have a list of the islands. Do you want me to bring that over here?
Yeah, we'll do that after we close that interview. Then we'll
I
videotape.
have a list of the islands that most all the islands that we went to while we was over there. The Yeoman, as it was. I think these are all from me, so I don't know what I did do with that one.
How was after being in the military and everything you saw, once you were discharged, how was the transition from military life to civilian life for you?
You know, again, I have to say thanks to my mother, thanks to the fact that I had an objective to go to school. I didn't go through what some of the other poor fellows did. Now, for example, her uncle, who I had a picture of him here a while ago, over there, I guess. He lived a quarter mile north of me, and he and I had fights and played ball together and everything as kids. And so he was as close to brother as I had. Well, he was on the carrier, and he was a coxswain on one of those small boats I was talking about too. Well, anyway, when he came home, he went to Tarawa. I don't know whether he went to Guadalcanal or not, but he is at Tarawa and had to make some landings with his small boat at that time, taking personnel aboard shore. Anyway, he had a different experience than I did. He was staying with her folks after he got out of the service, and he told her folks not to let any of the girls wake him up because he'd come out fighting, with that kind of I didn't have that problem. I was so happy to get back to security and a plan to get back to life that I hadn't had for over 3 years. And I just, that was my direction. I wanted to raise a family, which you did. And I didn't have the nightmares that some of the other fellows did have that you could hear about. So from that viewpoint, let me say, I felt like I assembled fairly well. I had to wear my uniforms. I took all my stripes off and everything. But I had a pair of khakis, a pair of grays. I still have them. And I wore those to school during that time. And we were highly respected. I'll never forget my shop teacher saying to some of the guys, "Don't mess with these guys. They're tough." I'll never forget that. I didn't say that. Anyway, I assembled rather easily, so you're not able to talk to a guy that had real trouble when I come back home. Because I was able to go to school, again, I had a family that was a great help to me. And again, I guess I basically knew where I was headed, except I didn't know what I was going to do in life.
Yeah.
I really thought I wanted to coach. I'd coached, even in high school, I coached a little grade school team that won the county tournament. Kids came to me and wanted to know if I'd be their coach. Well, they was already formed the team. They were good little old boys. And we won the county tournament with them. I'd have guys come by and congratulate me. I wasn't the coach. I was just a high school, senior high school. I coached the freshman team. We had a freshman team, and I'd coach the freshman team. We'd play at noon, during the noon hour. And they got to where we'd play the girls. The girls had a team. We had to play their rules, of course. And I designed some plays, and the old coach even took the plays and initiated them with the girls. So I was a coach. I liked that stuff. And so I wanted to get into that, I guess, after I didn't think so. I think I've said that. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I thought I wanted to work for the government, to be real honest about it. And that's why I went to Fort Sill. I thought there's some good jobs out there, but that didn't fit at all.
Well, I've only got really one last question for you before we kind of wind down this interview. How do you feel the war and your war experience affected your life or played a role in your life, changed your life, changed your frame of thought? Anything along those lines you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a very interesting question. Let me show you a little bit. I stayed in the service. I was actually not discharged until 1955. And I was a full lieutenant at that time. And anyway, the thing that I should have done, I would like to have done, but I respected my family more than I wanted to do that. I should have gone for 2 weeks training each summer. And I'd have wound up lieutenant commander and had a reserve. I had 14 years in the military totally. I'll get into that in a second. Anyway, I was released from active duty, placed on inactive duty in 1946, April 1946. That's when I went to Fort Sill, and then all later to move to Colorado. And then as I said, I didn't go back into training. Korea, I didn't really want. I tell you, my attitude was probably pretty nearsighted at that time. I didn't want to go back in the military because I figured I'd wind up as skipper of a ship, and I didn't want to do that. I just wasn't that much of a seaman.
Fair enough.
That was kind of a false, looking back, that was kind of a false direction or false attitude I had. I just didn't want to do that, but I wouldn't have done it. They had many other assignments my friends got that went on. So, but I didn't. I stayed out. I was supposed to report back for the Korean War, and I had a family of 3 at that time, and 3 children, and superintendent schools out to Swink, and I didn't want to leave. So as a result, they didn't take me back in. Well, then they finally discharged me in 1955. Well, there I go. I didn't want to be discharged. And so I went to Pueblo. They had a unit there, and they had a slot for me. They said they'd take me. I could show you the letter today that they wrote a letter for me and said they'd like to have me in their training unit, reserve unit. And so the Navy wrote back and said, "Too late, buddy. We discharged you and you had your chance." That's just it. So I hated that. I was superintendent of schools there at Swink, and we were building a gymnasium and a shop and a kitchen. And so we had an electrician who was Rocky Ford, by the name of Bush. And we was down having coffee together one day, and I got this notice, and I was telling him about it. He said, "You know, I'm the colonel and responsible for the headquarters of the Army, Colorado Army National Guard. I'd give you your same rank if you'd like to join me." I said, "I think I'll do it." So I joined the Army. And I went to Fort Carson for training a couple of summers with them. There's a 155 howitzer unit, that's what it was. And the Army was never anything that really, as I've said earlier, ever enticed me, but I tried to live with it because I was going to try to get my reserve time in, so I was after it. Well, I was with it, and I had a chance to, as superintendent, I had to be, I was kind of acting principal of a little school too. I had a principal, but had to do a lot of the discipline and that kind of stuff. And I tried to be at their activities, basketball, football, whatever. Well, as a result of that, I couldn't go just when I wanted to go to a training session. And so, I was the survey officer of the headquarters battery, so I was. We'd survey the quadrants and tell the fellows where to set their 155 howitzers. Well, I could go to La Junta, 5 miles on a certain night. I could go to Rocky Ford, 5 miles on a certain night. I could go down to Los Alamos, 25 miles. Another night I could go to Lamar, 60 miles. I could go down to Trinidad. They're all part of this unit. I don't know what it was called, but the battery. They each had a battery, as it was called in those towns, and I was headquarters battery, so I could go. I was responsible for the survey group, and any of those places I'd go when I wanted to. Well, so things was great, and frankly the income was nice too. I got a little help, and I got a little Social Security out of that too, by the way.
Good.
That and the service, yeah. Now, anyway, when I moved to Haxton, I was so involved. First thing we did was reorganize the district from 5 small districts to 1. And then we decided we needed to build an elementary school, and I was very involved. I had a Bell's palsy situation that hit me the first time I was there, first year. It stayed with me for 90 days. It was over here again. And anyway, health-wise, it took me a little bit. So if I was going to train, I had to either go 30 miles to Sterling or 108 miles down to Burlington. And out there, if you've ever been out in that area, you get a day like today, and you don't want to be out, but you'll get a lot of them. So I just didn't go. I didn't have to. I didn't go. Well, in 1965, the Army sent me a discharge, so that was the end of my service time. But that kind of tells you what my attitude was. Resentfully, lazily, I didn't stay with my reserve. And I had a good deal. I was a full lieutenant back in 1950, I think, somewhere along in there. They promoted me after I was even discharged. But anyway, I really wanted it, but it wasn't bad enough to stick with it. My family was important to me,
sure.
and it was important. It has always been.
Yeah.
Still is.
Yeah.
So anyway, I devoted my time. That's the reason I didn't finish my doctorate. I was up here in a situation. I didn't want to do it. Well, did that kind of tell you how I felt about the war and what?
Okay.
I was attuned to the service, if you will. Very much so. Been to several meetings since that time. As I said a week ago, last Tuesday, I went down to the Colorado Association of Amphibians, as they are called. I went to Dallas, Texas, to a national convention. I went to Wichita Falls to Iwo Jima convention. Been very active as such in those organizations today.
As we narrow down or finish off this interview, is there anything that I didn't ask or that you wanted to talk about? Any stories now that you think of we can finish out with before we shut her down?
As you've said, I'll have a chance to talk about the ribbons I have here.
Okay.
They're not great, but they're okay. Just looking at my notes of the questions you had asked, I took advantage of the GI Bill. As I said, I still belong to many of the organizations of the Navy.
Do you ever get together with any reunions with your ship? Have you?
Yes, we only had one. Only had one in Massachusetts. See, I'm probably a little derelict there. There's, to my knowledge, only 3 of the officers still living, and I was the senior officer of all of them. There's 2 skippers I had passed away with cancer. One was in California and the other in Florida. The one in Florida offered me a job, to get me a job, teaching in Florida right after the war. And that's $150 a month, by the way. I thought that was pretty good money. Well, anyway, now, the 3 officers I was about to say is my gunnery officer who became the exec after I left the ship. He lives in Michigan. And I was the only officer on that ship that came to that reunion, and that ship made it 3 wars. And that's what I don't understand. Most of my officers, I have no idea. We just quit corresponding. I have no idea what happened to them. I called the 2 skippers, interestingly, both of them in this case, after they had passed away, to talk to their wives. See, I knew their wives during the war, during the time we were together. And so I was disgusted at myself that I didn't call some of them before. But the gunnery officer lives in Michigan. I hear from him. I don't believe I've had a Christmas card from him yet this year. He wound up in school business too. And then the assistant gunnery officer, who lives, I believe, in Massachusetts, he's the one that helped us get back in the United States, as such as it was when we got back. We had gone through, as I said, two battles, and then 5 typhoons and a hurricane. We thought we had it. So we were moaning and groaning everywhere we could to get back home. And he happened to have a friend that worked for the Boston Herald paper. And he wrote a letter, and they published the letter about what we had gone through. It wasn't very long until we came back home. Yeah. Sam Cutler, he wound up in the teaching business too. I hear from him. Neither one of them came to that reunion. I didn't forgive them for that. I should have been there. I don't know why. And even the other officers, they went to Korea, and it went to, they decommissioned it along with a lot of others, and then recommissioned it because it was one of the newer ones, last ones to be commissioned, even though it had gone through all this stuff that we went through. Why, it was still a pretty fair ship apparently, and they recommissioned it. You know that they brought an old ship like that back from Greece.
Greece, I was going to ask you if you'd seen that special.
No, I haven't. No,
Yeah.
I want to see it. 326. You know, that's a sad story too. The skipper, Jordan or something like that, the guy that took over as skipper to bring it back, took an attitude for some reason, I have no idea, he was in the LST Association where you saw this paper a little while ago. But he took some kind of a sour attitude toward the association, where it was run like politicians or something of that nature, which none of us understand today. Well, anyway, he took the LST 326, as it was, and separated it out totally. It had nothing to do with the LST Association. That's right. I've read the articles, I've read letters of bitterness, and I don't understand why. And they're both in the same category. But anyway, we haven't had a real good communication with him. And why he has that kind of power, I don't understand. He's had a heart attack since that time, so I'm told. But anyway, that's another sad story.
Yeah.
Well, let's see now. Yes, we had a reunion, and of my ship, I had a call 2 days ago, I guess it was, from his fellow's wife, who we became friends again. He was in a radio, and as you know, officers and enlisted men didn't associate a lot social-wise. But after the war, we became real good friends. He went, there was an American War Memorial, and did a lot of things. He was in Massachusetts, where he didn't have to go very far. They had quite a celebration that he was part of. He died in September of this year. His wife called me a few days ago. Now, of the other fellows, I have no idea. I'd like so much to know what happened to my assistant, Dave Daggett from Connecticut. I went back with my wife to in 1976, we took a tour of the East Coast and historical sites for the centennial, and I was back there in a hotel in Hartford, Hartford's where she was. And technically that was where he was supposed to be from. He was also married. He married for a little bit overseas. And he's younger than I was a little bit. Well, got the telephone book and looked in Daggett's. Nobody knew him. Nobody by the name of Daggett knew him. And I was so disappointed with that. It just really hurt. Thinking I'd like to know what happened to David. We didn't communicate after the war. I communicated with the engineering officer some. He was a Catholic. It was going to be a priest, and gave it up. Got married and had a big family right after the war. But anyway, he was a little Frenchman, I guess it would be. Boucher, his name. He took care of the engineers, and I took care of the deckmen. Well, now, we had the one reunion, a nice reunion, back in a very famous place back in Boston. I can't think of it right quick, dadgummit. But got reacquainted with several of my shipmates that did come. One is a very fellow that likes to communicate with me. He's in Florida, I believe now. He stayed in the Navy and was discharged as lieutenant commander. I recommended him for officers training. And I forgot about that until I saw him again, and he reminded me that I was the one that made the recommendation for him. He was very appreciative, because he went through it and was discharged as lieutenant commander. So I hear from him. And then this radio man that I just lost, he's been very active back in that area. Local association, national association. Most of the meetings, because the number of men are back east. The closest one was Dallas, Texas, where we had one down there. But that was just the LST association, not just my ship.
Right.
I hear from some of them that was in the Korea. There's one fellow that is a furniture maker in Denver that looked me up after he found out that I was on the 1032. He was an engineer on the 1032 in the Korean War. And he brought a bunch of slides, gave them to me, what the activities during. Their war, of course, was totally different than us. They just were transport, more or less, things like that.
That leads to another question, too. Being in war, what is your thought on war and the wars since then that we've been in? Any thought on that?
Well, it's a shame in my books that we're into that. The present war, for example. We needed to do something about Iraq, apparently Iran too. But number one, to declare war against Iraq, I think was the most foolish way of handling that situation you could do. That's just simply the way I feel about it. I'm sorry, but I think Bush bullheadedly decided that he could win that one. And the way I see it today, and listening and reading what little I read, I try not to do too much of it because I don't appreciate it, that there's no way. It's like Vietnam. Korea, we seem to accomplish something there. By the way, I feel so sorry for the Vietnam and Korean soldiers, sailors, for veterans. We were so welcomed when we got back because, in simple terms, the United States had been attacked. And people, everybody, turned to. They recycled everything they could do and lived on rations and sacrificed as much as we did. I have a cousin that's now dead. I don't remember this, but she told some of the other cousins that our grandmother gave two of us grandchildren a war bond because we were in the war. She resented it. She said, "We fought back here too." I didn't know this until I was told recently by another cousin that she told me that. I don't even remember getting the $25, and it was fine if I did, you know. There's just two of us, a cousin of mine who's still alive. He was in the submarines, lost his sight, but he's still alive in Ohio. Well, anyway, my point is, everybody, my sisters, my dad, my mother, I don't know about your family, but whoever they were, they sacrificed too. They didn't get shot at, but that's about the only difference you can say, you see. And as you know, many of our old boys that were shot at sacrificed their total life, and that hurt a lot, knowing a lot of those people. Well, anyway, did I answer that question? I have a tendency to ramble too much.
No, you pretty much did. Yeah, you're talking about the Korean. You felt sorry for the guys in the Korean War.
Yeah, I really do.
They were just an important and forgotten war that they were forgotten.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This war, as I've said, the Iraq War is going to be, I'm afraid, a great deal like more Vietnam than Samoa. Samoa, we seem to have accomplished a little something. For us, here's a silly attitude I have. It's idealistic, obviously. But the United States is about as much out of favoritism and around the world as I know it is, as it ever has been, ever. And it's not going to be regained very easily if we regain it at all. And it's because of us telling those people, if you will, you got to be a democracy. As you know, I'm sure I love democracy. There's nothing better. But those people, I've been around enough and read enough. I've been to Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and so forth, 12 countries in Europe, so forth. And I've had kids and grandkids that gone to the other countries. Those countries aren't of nature that they think like we think. And I don't know how the only thing you could do, in my opinion, would take the present generation and isolate them and teach them democracy. How you vote, how you give power to certain people, and how you do things as a democracy. But until you could do that, and only if you could do that, I see no way of telling them that the Muslims aren't any good. All the other Christian relations, or whatever you want to call them, they're not attuned to that, and I don't know why they ever would be, because they have a different life, a different environment totally than what we have. And, good old America, I'm proud that I fought to keep our freedom. I'm quite proud of that, obviously. But to think that everybody else thinks like I do, I'm not that damn dumb. They've got a different opinion. They grew up differently. So I'm one that says if we need to defend our country, let's go. But I'm not one that says, hey, I think you've got to live like we do, so we're going to make you slaves until we make you what we think. I'm not that way. I just don't see it at all. And so none of my sons, I have two sons, and neither one of them, of course, one of them just barely missed the Korean War. It ended when he was number 30 and was supposed to be called in.
You mean the Vietnam War?
No, I see here. Yes, in Vietnam. Yeah. He went through CU and was deferred, of course. He was number 30 on the list to go in, but he didn't go in. And he's one that will want this information. He's one, Dad, I want all this stuff. The older boy, interestingly, Brad, because of his education, because of his, he's been to Japan, and he lived in Samoa, lived in India 4 years, lived in Samoa 2 years as Peace Corps, lived in Singapore 2 years with Hewlett Packard. He softened up a little bit just since my wife passed away on some situations that's come about with me, with the various things along this line. But he is not, he's very anti-war, let's just say it that way. He's a good civilian, a very good Christian, and has worked well through all the years. And he's not a, what do you call him? He's not, but he's not military. He said so just recently to me, Dad, I know you think a lot of the military, but that's just not me. What happened that brought this to a head, my wife died in April, and Memorial Day? Yeah, I guess Memorial Day. As you know, and I used to go to those. And so this time, she's out at Rest Haven, that's south here. And so they have a ceremony out there, and I thought, that's where I'm going to go. I usually go right over here to Spring Park. And so I said to him and my daughter, his son, the other son was in Denver, and he couldn't, but he'd have been there. But I said to my daughter and his son, I think you ought to go to the services out here where your mother is. I wanted him to go out because of his mother. I didn't think about the military. It's military, of course. Well, he finally came out. He didn't come over where we were, my daughter and I, until it was over. And he later told me, he said, well, I just don't appreciate the military. And I do. I'm very, as you see, I think, very respectful, because that was quite a bit of my life.
Yeah.
And so anyway, what got me off into that? You ask a question or something. I don't know what I was really trying to get over with that description. But I still, you was talking about the wars. And you know, I can feel for those poor devils at Iraq. I cannot feel for them. The old saying that we used to say, you got to walk in the Indians' moccasins to know what the situation is. And you can see the Indians' moccasins, you can be around them, until you walk in those suckers and know what happened. You cannot visualize really the total thing. And that's what you've tried to get out of me today, is what that war looked like. I feel like I've kind of bounced all around it. But anyway, as such, war, I'd go back to war if I had to defend this America. I'd tell my boys, you better go too. But on the other hand, the wars that we've been in since World War II, I guess they can be called wars, but they're not war as we knew them. We're not trying to save our country. I don't know what we are trying to do, I guess, in simple terms. That's my attitude.
Yeah.
So I'm not very lenient toward. Now, I'm very much to go into the service. Right over there lies a magazine that I picked up last Tuesday. The recruiter spoke to our group down in Denver at lunch. That's the second time he's done that. And he's quite knowledgeable. He's a fairly young fellow, but he's been in service quite a while. He gave us, I don't know what it's called, I'll put it up here in a minute. In that, I read an article that he wanted us to read about the latest development of the ship building. Those poor devils, just think about what they went through.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what hurts me. I felt so sorry for him. I was glad I didn't go into that.
Yeah.
And I did it on purpose, of course, because I didn't want that. Cameron. Yeah, you sit down. Good boy.
Okay. Well, let me. We'll wrap up this interview. I want to thank you for your time today, but more importantly, I want to thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you. I appreciate the last statement very much. For midshipman school, this is a 48-star flag that we folded, my wife and I put it in here. These bottom ones that I have here are an Army. Some Army. I didn't get any medals from them. This little picture here is I was 10 months as an enlisted man, apprentice seaman, in training to be an officer. This is a picture here of me at Northwestern University, Chicago, and I was a midshipman at that point in time, before I graduated. This is the, remembering right, Asian, I believe that's the Mediterranean. Because we came down the coast out of Boston and New York, that's where we were eligible for the Mediterranean medal. This is Asian medal for all the areas in Asia. And you know, I have to say, honestly, I don't recall. This was the, I believe this is a victory. Oh, you know what, that says Asia. Oh, this is Pacific. And this is Asia. And this is a victory, what was called a victory medal for the victory of the United States. This is just one of my bars and things like that, buttons. This is a list of all the islands, or most all the islands that we went to when we were over there, that area. We started out in Hawaii, Pearl Harbor. Well, we were in Boston, where the ship was, am I still okay?
Mm-hmm.
Where the ship was commissioned in August the 3rd, I'll say August the 1st, 1944. And my wife and I both were there, of course. And then we went to, it was in Virginia. Bayonne, New Jersey is where we loaded up to go down the coast and over to the Pacific side. It was in New York, and then it was in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Anchored there one night. It was in Coca-Cola, Panama one night. Went through the canal. Went on over to San Diego. Saw Costa Rica and Puerto Rico on our way up that side. Let's see here. Then to Pearl Harbor in October 1944. Maui, and all the islands, several times. We was in training there, landing and beaching, having a ship, night ship and so forth. We went to Anahuac, the Marshall Islands, and I say there we were there 3 times. I didn't remember all that. This was printed before we left the ship, so it's authentic from the viewpoint of our yeoman, which is what you think of as a typist, was the one that typed this up for each of us. And let's see, I had, I said, the Saipan and the Mariana Islands 3 times. Of course, Iwo Jima, February the 19th, 1945. It was on what's called Yellow Beach at that time. That's when we beached. Later is Okinawa. And then we went to one that we haven't listed here, is where Ernie Powell was killed, Shima, I-E-S-H-I-M-A, the little bitty nothing island. We were taking some, I think it was gasoline over there, because there must have been a landing strip on that. The very day that he was killed, we didn't know that at that time, but we were there in that spot. He was a nice old boy. Now let's see here. Okinawa, Ulithi, and the western Carolina Islands. We passed Guam, didn't stop. We went to, here it is, Hiroshima, Iheyya, Shima, in the Hansu Islands. Well, I know, and then here is I see we had 3 islands there. I hadn't thought of that we did some work on. The other one is Iheyya. These are all in what was called the Nagasaki Islands at that time, and what it's called today. Then we went to San Pedro Bay in Leyte several times. I say 4 times here. That's where we picked up our supplies most of the time. We went to Samar, S-A-M-A-R, I don't remember that, is also in the Philippines. We went to Manila in the Philippines, went to Subic Bay in the Philippines. San Fernando, Luzon in the Philippines. San Fabian, Lingayen Gulf, Luzon, and Philippines. It was all around that place. I was thinking we went to Corregidor, but we don't list it here. We saw where Wainwright and his poor guys marched, the death march through there. And then we went to Yokohama Bay in Japan, September the 15th, 1945. We went there 2 times, I guess. And then we actually had 3 battle stars. Iwo Jima, Okinawa, Hiroshima. That's what's called 3 battle stars at that time. So that's what's here. Not a lot compared to a lot of people, but on the other hand, that's neat. I don't want to flaunt it, I guess you call that.